Hey everybody, it's Natalie from Power Moon Tarot. Thank you so much for joining me today as I embark upon the second annual astrology forecast that I am doing on this channel. And in order to watch this video, I will be posting timestamps after the video is processed. If there's certain transits that you really want to look at, that you're really into and excited about, I will be doing timestamps on those. And another way also to look at this video is to note as I'm going through the transits of 2025 that I'll be talking about the the individual, how it will affect the individual, and how the transits will also be impacting the collective. So please do watch for that as I'm going through, because I'm going to be making an effort to actually talk about both. And I'm just good. The technology is up and running, and sorry for the confusing late start there, but we are back and we are in business. And Mercury retrograde has officially ended as of about an hour ago. So we're still kind of in that static, but nonetheless, we are here. And for those of you who don't know who I am too much, my name is Natalie, and I've been reading your energy here on YouTube since 2020. I have over 700 videos on my channel. And for those of you that are interested, I have celebrity natal chart readings, natal chart readings of historical figures, animal totem readings, love readings, spiritual readings, astrological forecasts, and teaching on the 7 traditional planets. If you're interested in any of those topics, do check out my playlist. And I will also be posting in the description box below links for how to find me on my website to book a natal chart reading with me or to book a tarot reading with me. All those details will be in my description box of the video. And also, if you want to find me on social media and follow me there, you can find me on Blue Sky, and my name handle is Natalie H Astrology. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'm really excited to get into the astrology of 2025 with you. A little bit about my background as an astrologer. I studied traditional Western astrology using the Regimentanus house system. That is how I originally learned astrology. And then I switched over to whole sign house eventually, as it had a lot more tools for prediction. I've also studied Indian astrology as well. And oftentimes mix in my presentation and in my lectures, I'll mix the Eastern philosophy with the Western philosophy, and you will find some of that in my presentation today. So with that being said, hi Pinky, thank you for coming, and here to find out how cooked we are. Much love, says one commenter. Thank you, Pinky. Yes, we are a little cooked going into 2025 indeed. And actually, I have my disco ball here, and it's like a water cup that you can drink from. There's only water in there, but it is a really fun disco ball cup. And anyway, I figured it was on point for the apocalypse party that we are having today. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and those who will watch after. I really do appreciate it. And let's go ahead and start talking about the astrology of 2025. So 2025 astrology is what I call, especially the first part of the year, is a real Pisces and Aries party. So if you have planets in the last degrees of Pisces or the early degrees of Aries, then you are in what I am calling the hot zone for 2025. And so one thing I wanted to really get into was the plethora of planets that are going to be going forward into Aries and then retrograding back into Pisces later on in the year, and what is going on with that energy. So we are going to talk about that. And one thing that we need to kind of anchor ourselves in when talking about next year with the end of Pisces, early Aries energy, is that in astrology, we divide each sign up to 10-degree segments. So we've got, we call them decans. So the first decan of Aries is 10 degrees. The second decan of Aries is 10 degrees. And the third decan of Aries is 10 degrees, which equals 30 degrees in a particular sign. So when I'm talking about the decans, we're having a lot of planets that are in the last decan of Pisces and in the very first decan of Aries. And so that is something to understand about next year. And both of those decans are ruled by Mars. So the last 10 degrees of Pisces is ruled by Mars, and the first 10 degrees of Aries is also ruled by Mars. So we have that energy going on. And basically, what we have going on is we have the North Node moving from Aries into Pisces, okay? That Aries Pisces energy. We've got Saturn and Neptune in the last degrees of Pisces, moving into Aries and then moving back into Pisces again in the year. We've got a Venus retrograde, which starts in Aries and goes back to Pisces. And we have a Mercury retrograde, which starts in Aries and goes back into Pisces. And it's all over those last degrees of Pisces and first degree of Aries, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. And for those of you now, one thing you're going to notice in this presentation is that it is hi from Australia. Yay. Awesome. And Laura M444 says hi from Australia. Hi there, Laura. Thank you for joining the webcast. And one thing you're going to notice in my presentation today is that there's a lot of pictures. And I know when I'm learning something, I like pictures, I like dramatic music, I like art and music. And I do think 2025 is going to be good for, like dramatic art, dramatic music, creativity, visualization, imagination. These are going to be things that are really on point in 2025. And being able to visualize the new is something that we're all going to want to work on, right? And also, it's boring, right? If I just come on here and talk about astrology, it gets boring. We need pictures, right? We learn through pictures. And so in the spirit of not being boring, I am going to be giving you guys a lot of pictures and things to stimulate your eyes, okay? And one thing I want to talk about with those first degrees of Aries, those first degrees in Aries are represented by the planet Mars and represented by Mars in Aries, okay? By Mars ruling the first decan of Aries. And what that looks like, for those of you that are familiar with the tarot, what that looks like is it looks like the Tower, which is represented by Mars, and the Emperor, which is represented by Aries. Now, even if you don't know anything about the tarot and you're just thinking about all those planets going through those first degrees of Aries, even if you know nothing about the tarot and nothing about astrology, you can look at that picture and tell me what you think it means, right? It looks like perhaps one man is responsible for the destruction of everything, right? I'm being a little bit glib right now. I'm being a little bit flippant. But what does that look like to you? Does that look spicy to you? Does that look wild to you? Does that look chaotic to you? Absolutely. Does it look fiery? Does it look a little bit disturbed? Absolutely. Okay. And one book that I really love, and if you're into the tarot, you may want to pick up this book. It's been out for a while, but it's called The 36 Faces, and it has to do with the decans. Or not the 36 Faces. I'm sorry, that's Austin Coppock. But this is 36 Secrets by T. Susan Chang. And she wrote a book about the tarot and how the tarot interacts with the decans in astrology, okay? And she talks about this combination of the first decan of Aries and talks about how like brutal it can be. Now, again, I am giving you guys a tableau here, and we're going to see highs and we're going to see lows. We're going to see good. We're going to see wild. So try not to get too freaked out by anything I'm saying here. But one thing that T. Susan Chang wrote in her book, 36 Secrets, about the Decans is she wrote that this combination of the Tower and the Emperor represents the radical eviction of the old order ruled with the iron fist of the patriarchy. Now, that is pretty on point, especially in the US, where we saw, Donald Trump is the winner and da 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 and all that. And he's putting into effect this cabinet that is like hell bent on chaos and doesn't know what it's doing. And I'm not going to spend this whole webcast talking about politics, but I just want you guys to grasp the gravity here and see that we're looking at the radical eviction of the old order ruled by an iron fist. And it actually reminded me of that song by Miley Cyrus called Wrecking Ball, where she says, I came in like a wrecking ball. All I wanted to do was break down your walls. Okay. And I think that is very true for the astrology of 2025. It's coming in like a wrecking ball and it wants to break down our walls. And one thing is because we're going to be having the destruction of these old rigid structures to make way for the new, the individual is going to need to steady themselves in the eye of the storm. The actual individual is going to need to steady themselves in the chaos and have unwavering principles for what they believe in. And that will help because we are moving into a period of forced evolution and we have to know where we stand. We have to know we're going to learn what walls need to be broken down, and we're going to understand how we need to evolve. And it may not be pretty, it may not be that pretty. And what we may see, is a lot of breaking through of inertia. Okay. But we may also see the destructive force of colonization. We may also see pointless fighting and temper tantrums over things taking too long. We may also see people just destroying things without any thought in order to get quick results. We may see a lot of that energy coming through. And Pinky says, I heard clown music in my head. Oh, yeah, right? And you can see how people are going to want to gain the upper hand or gain control over something, but the world is kind of a chaotic mess. And if people aren't getting what they want, they may become belligerent. They may become rude about it. Okay, so we just need to be aware of that energy, because this energy that's coming in like a wrecking ball is not subtle. Okay, Mars in Aries, or Mars through the first decan of Aries, is not a subtle energy, and it has to do with bulldozing everything to the ground in order to restructure things in a new way. Okay. And I have a wonderful biblical poem prepared for all of you who are watching about the astrology of 2025 to share with you, which I think is going to represent, Aries, the first decan of Aries, in a very strong way, where we have all these planets moving through that territory. And the poem I have to read to you is Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who, in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of the darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers, and you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee. Okay? So that is an that is an interesting. Hi, Anna. Anna Hara just jumped in as I was reading Ezekiel 25-17. Yeah, as I am explaining Mars in the first decan of Aries, right? I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance, right? But this attitude of I am my brother's keeper, and blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill, okay, Pisces energy, those planets going back into the Pisces part, shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, okay? But there is a part of 2025 which may be a real Old Testament kind of a year, a real fire and brimstone type of a year. With themes of punishment and revenge and Mars opposite Pluto. We have a leader in our country, in the United States, who has promised revenge on his enemies. And one question we could say is, who will protect the weak in the name of charity and goodwill? And we see anger and vengeance towards an enemy who has been destroying its victim. And we saw that recently as well. Like, we're seeing these signs already pop up in our consciousness with the assassination of United CEO Healthcare Brian Thompson, and how, anger and vengeance towards the healthcare industry is coming out. But we have anger and vengeance toward an enemy who has been destroying its victim. Okay. We also have a question in 2025 of who is the victim, who is the aggressor, and who is holding on to a destructive persecution complex, okay? And those are things that we need to think about in 2025, not only personally, but collectively. And humiliation often leads to revenge and backbiting, and those costs are going to become evident. There is excitable energy available in 2025, but it's also energy that could be looking for a fight. And the question is, how do we handle this aggressive energy? Um, yeah, yep, a character, yep, and Pulp Fiction, exactly, yep, and exactly. And I've always wanted to read that poem, and I figured 2025 is a great year to do it. So that is the first decan of Aries, which we're going to see many planets going into and out of and into and out of during the year. We also have the last decan of Pisces, okay? And the last decan of Pisces is represented by Mars in the last decan of Pisces. So Mars in Pisces. And in the tarot, it looks like this beautiful imagery, the tower and the moon. Okay. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh, it's double towers, right? Because the moon card has a tower in it and the tower has a tower. So it's double towers. And then I noticed, oh no, the moon actually has two towers in it. So it's double and triple towers. And with Mars in Pisces and this tableau of insanity that we see on our screen here, there is this energy in the last 10 degrees of the zodiac in Pisces, where we're going to find many planets, stationing retrograde, going back, coming over, right? Where we're going to find many planets doing this. We find this energy of having to let go and descend into the chaos of the unknown. And this is where the swirling motion of the tower can hypnotize us under the light of the moon. We saw a lot of uncertainty in 2024. We're going to see more of it in 2025. And the danger with this type of tableau of insanity is that we regress back into a childlike state and become mute, numb, and unable to move because of what we're experiencing. There are some people who may handle the energy that way. There are other people that are going to do what Prince did and party like it's 1999. I don't know if you guys know that song by Prince, but tonight I'm gonna party like it's 1999. Okay, 2025 has a real energy like that where it's like, I gotta get my kicks. This world is crazy, and I'm like up and down, up and down, up and down constantly. And all I wanna do is, get fucked up. So there's gonna be some people who are feeling that way in 2025. And oh, DG is here. Oh my gosh. All the Australian girlies have checked in, and I truly love that. I love that for me. Thank you for being here, my friends. And yeah, there are some people with the energy of 2025 that are going to want to get real messed up on whatever it is they feel like smoking, drinking, tweaking on whatever, because the energy is going to be really volatile. And the ups and downs may feel downright crazy. Like one moment I'm on the top of the world, and the next minute I'm down in the dirt and I have nothing, right? It's a lot. And it's people are tempted to go off the deep end and kind of do something crazy, I feel. And for those of you that are on TikTok at all and you follow like Gen Z trends, there's a big trend called crashing out. And it's where somebody like does something crazy and like crashes out afterwards. And I do feel like this is a big crashing out type of energy. It reminds me of when Britney Spears in 2007 shaved her head and then took a baseball bat and went after the paparazzi with a baseball bat, and it was all like filmed and recorded. I, I do think 2025 may have some crazy energy like that, where it's like we're kind of going off the deep end here, right? So we really need to um, stabilize ourselves in our principles and in our ethics first and foremost. And the other thing that I think people will be really into in 2025 is epic art, epic music. I think, this type of chaotic energy is amazing for people who are artists and like really chaos driven and love chaos magic and just want to go on a total binge and create and destroy and create and destroy. I think it's going to be probably a year for amazing art. And I am looking forward to that part of it, or where music or art hits you on like a really deep level. I also think Pinky is saying, yeah, talking about, yeah, crashing out a foot. Oh my God, they're taking TikTok. Yeah, they're taking the TikTok ban, right? And yeah, I wish as I was in Australia too, Pinky. I do too. Do you think Anahara and DG will adopt us? Do you think that they'll adopt us? Although I don't know. I mean, maybe we can get adopted, but um but yeah, I also think it's interesting that, our president in the United States has promised massive deportations of immigrants, and the moon, it does have to do with, home and safety and security. And what you see with the tower is people getting kicked out of their home and people getting kicked out of their safety and security. There may also be like a lot of environmental disasters that cause people to have to move or immigrate or leave because the conditions they're living in are no longer, they can't stay in their home anymore. And I think that this tableau of insanity of the last 10 degrees of Pisces, like really does fit in with that imagery of people getting kicked out of their homes due to environmental destruction or political instability. Also, with this tableau, it's like, okay, we need to totally let go of the rational mind. And it feels scary. And some people may have legitimate psychotic breaks with reality. Okay. And we're going to need to be there for those people or help them through that, or help them get stabilized in their energy. Okay. Because I think there could be a lot of ups and downs next year. And people who have nothing left to lose will do very crazy things. And I think we will see that next year, not just in the United States, but all over the world. If you have nothing left to lose and everything in your life is burning down, then what, like, people who have nothing left to lose will do crazy things. That's the end of the story with that. And it reminds me of that song, slipping through my fingers all the time, that I try to capture every minute, right? And it may kind of feel like in 2025, like everything is slipping away, or time is running away, or everything is slipping away very quickly, or things are shifting and changing so rapidly that I need to kind of like freeze frame the moment I'm in, because it could shift any moment. And one thing that this tableau of insanity reminds us is that everything is fleeting, even tragic loss, everything in the world is fleeting, even tragic loss. And I think that that is interesting. Okay. And holding on to hope, and struggling to hang on to a vision of hope after the rain is something that we will be needing to look at, I feel like. Okay. And as I mentioned, we're going to have a lot of pictures and art and music and everything in the presentation tonight. And immediately when I saw that tower with the moon and all those planets transiting over that spot, I thought of a song from the 80s by a band called Foreigner. And there's a song called Double Vision. And I feel like, a lot of people, their vision, like the moon with the tower is like, I'm seeing double all these towers, right? And some of the lyrics to Double Vision are feeling down and dirty, feeling kind of mean. I've been from one to another extreme. This time I had a good time, ain't got time to wait. I want to stick around till I can't see straight. Fill my eyes with that double vision, no disguise for that double vision. Ooh, when it gets through to me, it's always new to me. My double vision gets the best of me, okay? And I do think there's going to be some people that maybe are partying hard, or their views on life dramatically change from one moment to the next. One moment they're on top of the world, the next minute they're crashing down. Emotions up in the air. Enjoy something while you can, because it's bound to crash. Each day is wildly different. I will tell you, it's not a boring energy. The energy of 2025 is not boring. I mean, each day is unpredictable. Emotions may be all over the place and may be very messy. Okay. And yeah. And again, that whole theme of crashing out and going insane and doing something stupid, we want to make sure that we don't do that too much. Okay. You got to fight for your right to party, as Pinky said. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And I think there's a lot of people with the North Node heading into Pisces that are going to be partying pretty hard next year, right? Hard times require furious dancing, as they say. And some of you at this point in the webcast, you may be looking at me strangely and saying, Natalie, are you for real? Like, is this a real forecast? Like, what are you smoking, my friend? Okay. And the thing so in the tarot, when we think of the last decan of Pisces, the one card that actually summarizes Mars and Pisces is the 10 of Cups, right? So I just told you guys all about Ezekiel 25:17 and striking down with furious anger and a tableau of insanity. And then I present to you the 10 of Cups. And you're looking at me like I have 10 heads. And you're like, are you actually crazy? Are you for real? You're telling me, Natalie, at this point that in 2025, I should learn to appreciate each moment for what it is, anchor myself in the present moment, create my own little reality where no one else can harm me and touch me with the people that I love, that I should be enjoying the pleasurable moments because you never know what's coming next, and that we need to find moments of joy and creative expression in a fucked up world. And if you were telling me that, I would say I 100% agree with you. And I am for real that we do need to try to enjoy ourselves in the present moment. And we do need to kind of live for the present moment, I feel like, in 2025. Okay. And yeah. And Pinky says, I'll take any positives, for real. Yeah. And, enjoying those moments and asking ourselves, do we have any hope left? And where can we find that hope? Right? And where can we have those moments of peaceful togetherness and appreciating the moment, right? Oh, this is a nice day. Simplistic, simple moments. And right now, guys, I'm going to transition away for one moment from Western astrology, and I'm going to transition a little towards Indian astrology just for a moment here, as I am talking about all of these planets, right? I talked about Neptune, Rahu, I talked about Saturn and Neptune and Venus and all of these planets that would be going from Pisces back into Aries and then back into Pisces. And I keep talking about that transition, okay? So in Indian astrology, there is something called a Gandanta point. And Gandanta is when we move from a water sign into a fire sign. So anytime we move from Cancer to Leo, or Scorpio to Sagittarius, or Pisces to Aries, we have planets crossing what is called the Gandanta point. And 2025 is a huge Gandanta point. Literally every inner planet in the sky, besides the moon, because it moves too quickly, and Jupiter, is going to be going through these massive Gandanta points throughout the year, and not just in March when we have all the retrogrades and back from Aries, into Pisces, but also later in the year when we have planets shifting back from Aries into Pisces. Okay, so we're just going to have Gandanta, Gandanta, Gandanta all year long. And even Mars is going to be Gandanta for the first half of the year, basically, because it is transitioning from Cancer to Leo and then back to Leo. So Mars is doing a Gandanta dance as well, but we have a Mercury retrograde that's Gandanta. We have a Venus retrograde Gandanta, Saturn Neptune Gandanta, Rahu, or the North Node Gandanta. And at this point, I've said Gandanta to you a million times, and you're asking me probably, what is Gandanta? Gandanta is a spiritual knot, okay? It's where water transitions into fire in the zodiac, and it represents a spiritual knot. It is a well-tied knot, and the more you try to untie it, the tighter it gets. We're dealing with a deep issue we're trying to reconcile with. And for those of you, for those of you that know your own chart, I want you to check where you have Pisces and Aries. Like what house? For me, that represents the 6th house and the 7th house. And I certainly already know this energy already. It's the energy between my health and helping others or interacting with others, So this has been going back and forth for me already. You probably already have an idea of what Gandanta issues are coming up for you, but think about your own chart and where Pisces and Aries are in your chart, and do you have planets there? Because that is all about to get lit up in 2025 in a major way. And think about what that spiritual knot is for you. And planets that are going through the Gandanta point face uncertainty as they try to unravel the secret knot, which will take them to the next level. It's like wanting to move forward, but into the future, but you can't deny the present. And you have to come to terms with the reality of today in order to move forward. And so that is Gandanta. And we have many, many planets that are in that position. And so I have this picture here, which I think is very evocative, which is a picture of the ocean and then lava falling into the ocean. That is Gandanta, okay? And so there is a lot. The only planets really that are not going to be, Jupiter will not be Gandanta next year, and neither will Uranus or Pluto. Pretty much everything else is going Gandanta. So that's where we're at. And I have this picture of, a spiritual knot here for you guys. And Saturn Gandanta is particularly intense, okay? All, Mercury going Gandanta, Venus, those ones happen more regularly. But Saturn being Gandanta multiple times throughout the year is really, really intense. And this is wild. This is actually wild because Saturn is at the junction of destruction and creation. And it's going to be making a conjunction with Neptune. And this is where we have to hold tight to our faith because we really need something to believe in. And in the year 2025, starting anything new is going to take immense effort, patience, courage, and self-belief, particularly when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries. Like anything new that we're starting, we are really, really going to have to say, is this something that I want to do? Am I willing to commit to this? Okay. There will be success and failure as a spiritual lesson next year for a lot of people. There's going to be lessons around failed leadership, Saturn and Aries, and eventually a dissolution of trust around failed leaders, which is going to create a stronger sense of self-reliance among people, is what I feel. And the unpuzzled goddess, you made it, my friend. Oh, yeah. Yeah, an unpuzzled goddess says Saturn. Yep. Saturn Gandanta is really, really intense. And when we have Saturn Gandanta, there can be things like hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, people making prophecies about the end of the world, rapture, people looking for solutions to the end of all their suffering. And with the North Node in Pisces, all of this Gandanta energy is just all enhanced. And we may actually next year see an increase in cults and religions trying to make money off of people's fear. Okay, so that is something to definitely watch out for next year. And really, the FAFO era is upon us. And for those of you that are like, what's FAFO? I don't know what FAFO means. FAFO means fuck around and find out. Okay. And what is happening with Saturn Gandanta is the result of our collective karma as individuals. And a lot of people are complaining because they're saying, hey, I didn't fuck around, but I still have to find out. That's not fair, right? And that talks about existing in the collective karma versus trying to escape from the collective karma. And change first starts on a mental level. So we need to be open and flexible. We need to start understanding emotions and devotion and the collective wellness. And, one thing I think is next year, there is going to be a high potent energy for those needing a miracle. But on the opposite end of that is going to be snake oil salesmen selling miracle cures. And then they're going to be on the prowl for their next victims. And there may be a pull to sedatives, psychedelics, and zoning out next year too. Okay, so that is, that is there. And I wonder if Vedic astrology would be sidereal. Yeah, it is, Danny. It is sidereal, and it is 23 to 24 degrees back from Western. You are very right about that. And Pinky says she is wearing a FAFO shirt and it has a pink fairy on it. I love that. The FAFO fairy. Okay. So that is interesting. We may see a big pull to that next year. I mean, there may be people that they need a miracle in their life and they actually get it too. So that is totally possible as well. But I would say just be on the lookout for people that are peddling false shit, because I think, with Uranus and Gemini next year, the schemers are going to be scheming. And with Rahu and Pisces, there could be, people posing as saviors who pretend they have all the answers for people. So we need to kind of watch out for that energy. Now, I want to, from this point on, I talked a lot about that Aries Pisces stuff going on, but now I want to transition into Neptune and Aries. Now, the picture that you see here is actually from where I live in Virginia Beach. There's an amazingly huge Neptune statue, and then there's like the ocean behind it, and it's really gorgeous. But for the first time in 165 years, we're going to be having Neptune in Aries, which is a huge change because we've had Neptune in Pisces for the last 14 years. And so we are going to, in 2025, we are going to get our very first taste of Neptune in Aries. Now, one thing we need to remind ourselves about, like, what is Neptune? And I love this picture. Again, I'm hitting you guys with the visual art during my presentation, and it's kind of fun to look at it. And I think visual art and artistic, creative creations in 2025 are going to be really on point, and that's why I felt so keen to put in so much art and music in my presentation. But even if you look at this photo, I think it's very Neptunian because you can see the outline of a face in it, and you don't know exactly what it is. You can also see the number 4 and down in the corner there, and it also looks like there is a line of stitches around someone's head, and that the stitches are being cut with the scissors, okay? And this is all Neptune stuff, right? When we look at a picture, and you guys may see different things in the picture. I see the number 12 right there too in the middle, and the letter C right next to it, okay? And maybe when you guys look at that picture, you see something a little different. You're like, no, I see a whatever in the corner, right? And that is all Neptunian. The ability to look at something that's very faded and hazy and kind of weird looking and come up with different thoughts and imagery around it. Neptune has to do with faith, spirituality, sensitivity, seeing a different spectrum of reality, colors and sounds, attuned to higher states of consciousness, the loosening of the ego, the embracing of oneness is all very Neptunian. But Neptune is also delusion and sickness and spiritual bypassing and the weakening of the will and vitality, devotion without question, psychedelics, mind-altering substances, mass confusion, victim states, and addiction. So those are all very much Neptunian things. And the Unpuzzled Goddess is saying, I see a woman smiling with rain pouring down on her face and 2 flowers in her hair. Oh my God, I love that. See, and this is true when you're, like when I'm doing tarot readings or doing any type of intuitive work, and I'm scrying or I'm seeing what isn't there, right? With Neptune, we're seeing what isn't there and we're letting our imagination run wild. But there's also intuitive messages in that as well. Okay, so Neptune has been in Pisces and for the last 14 years, and now Neptune is moving into Aries, which is a very active sign. And one thing that really hit me for Neptune in Aries was the focused, concentrated energy of the magician who is bringing down into into a new reality, who's taking something that's formless and putting his own will into it and turning it into something totally different. And the question with Neptune and Aries is, how can my will become a larger will, become the larger will of the cosmos? And this is about aligning our will to something larger than ourselves, and how we don't do that on our own. We do that with the help of spirit. And some people are going to feel perhaps because Neptune can create confusion. So it may also, some people may feel like they don't have what they need right now to move forward with purpose. And I don't feel like I'm here for a reason. And I don't understand what I want to do, so I can't move forward. So that may be a feeling of Neptune and Aries as well, but there may also be a lot of exciting, creative, new energy coming through that is like a shot of coffee into the vein of the masses. Okay. And DG says she's had some wild dreams about traveling to Neptune. Yeah, particularly the Aries people, like they are definitely going on the Neptune train, DG, for sure. If I know how you have Aries in your chart. And Taylor is here. Hi, Taylor. I just saw your message. Hi there, my friend. So a couple now. Another thing we may see with Neptune and Aries is attacks on magicians, because magicians are Neptunian. They bend reality, and in a very active way. So we may see attacks on magicians. We may see this is really weird, but I was thinking of like blood sacrifices. Something may come up in the news about that. I mean, Neptune's going to be in Aries for 14 years, so we're going to see a lot of stories about this. We're just starting with our Neptune and Aries journey, but there may be some weird stuff about blood sacrifices or attacks on magicians. Okay, that's really niche, but it's kind of interesting, so I needed to kind of mention it. One modern day magician that we have with us on the planet right now, and I've read his chart on my channel before, is Philippe Petit, who is a high wire walker who walked between the Twin Towers of New York City in 1974 without a safety net. And he has Neptune rising in his chart, and he has a square between Mars and Neptune. And, his whole life was driven by his dream, and his dream of making his dream a reality. And in his quest to make his dream come true and walk between the Twin Towers, he was arrested like multiple times at various buildings, trying to sneak in so that he could go and walk dangerously in the air between two buildings. And so this is, to me, like a modern day magician, and he was motivated to achieve his wildest dreams. There's several movies about him where it shows there's a movie called The Walk that came out several years ago. And it's about daring to dream of something that others would say is totally impossible. And with Neptune and Aries, we need to be passionately driven to achieve our dreams. And we need to think about what sacrifices are we willing to make in order to achieve our dreams. And in the case of Philippe Petit, he was arrested multiple times trying to achieve his dream, but he did do it. And the next quick chart of Neptune and Aries that I'd like to present is Harry Houdini, who is actually born during the Neptune and Aries generation, who has an out of sign Mars-Neptune conjunction in his own chart. And he was an escape artist, an illusionist, and stunt performer. He had multiple planets in Aries and Neptune. He was president of the Society of American Magicians. And his last words were, "I'm tired of fighting. I guess this is going to get me," which is very Neptune and Aries, I think. And even though he was a magician and he was president of the Society of American Magicians, he in his later years campaigned against mind readers, mediums, and others who claim to have supernatural powers. And so I think that is very interesting. He also has a Neptune quincunxes Jupiter, which says that he may have some hypocritical spiritual beliefs, like how, you're a magician, but yet you're going to campaign against other other people in the world. Anyway, so we may see some of that energy too. But I thought his chart was interesting. Harry Houdini is an example of Neptune in Aries. And Neptune in Aries, Gilly Mac, you made it. Yay. And one thing Neptune in Aries, the big question of Neptune in Aries is, what inspires me into action? What actually inspires me to get moving in my life? And where in my life can I dream in color vividly? And I love the red jacket in this photo. And whenever I think about, Mars Neptune or Neptune and Aries, those kind of combinations, I think about like people that have a dream of climbing Mount Everest. And all they can see when they've trained for it, they've worked hard for it, they're athletes, they're out there with a dream, and they're making it up that mountain, and they see the top and they're getting tired, but they're like, I don't care. I did everything to get here. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing. But then on the way down, they run out of energy and they run out of oxygen and energy, and they get very weak and they pass out. And some of them actually die on the mountain. And I think that's a very Neptune and Aries energy. Like, we get so excited, we start pushing ourselves, but then we have no energy for the downhill climb, and we end up getting lost and confused. And with Neptune and Aries, we have to be careful of pushing ourselves beyond our limits and of being so gung-ho that we're not paying attention to the signs, that we're starting to get shaky. There are also, with Neptune and Aries, there may be an underestimation of danger. Like, it's not a big deal, but actually it's really dangerous. And sometimes when we see signs of progress, we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we end up regretting it because we actually need to rest, okay? And I also think Neptune and Aries is a huge energy of being lost and not asking for directions, right? And that may also become kind of bad during Neptune and Aries, is people getting real lost, but not wanting to admit that they're lost, and not asking for directions, and then getting more lost, right? So we got to kind of watch those impulses with Neptune and Aries. Again, we have 14 years of Neptune and Aries, so we have a long time to kind of adjust to it. And I want to give you guys some dates here. And again, with the artwork, which I totally love, you can see the ram horns right there on her head, which is very Aries, and then the red and orange colors, which are very Aries. But the picture looks very hazy, right? The picture is very hazy, which is Neptune and Aries. And Neptune moves into Aries on March 30th. Okay, this March 30th of next year. This is 10 days after the spring equinox and 1 day after the last Aries eclipse. Okay, so Aries, for those of you that have been feeling the pain of these Aries Libra eclipses, Neptune goes into Aries the day after the last Aries eclipse, and that may bring some healing to you, actually, and some closure to that transit. But Neptune is moving into Aries while Mercury is retrograde and while Venus is retrograde. So it's exciting times, but it's also kind of a clusterfuck, I think, a little bit. And we're pushing into new territory here. And when Neptune moves into Aries, we can feel a rush of new energy and opportunities. And it's like, what do I want to do? What do I want to tackle first? And one thing that I want to, draw our attention to is the first retrograde of Neptune in Aries next year. So Neptune goes into Aries at the end of March, But then on July 4th, okay, Neptune is going to have its first retrograde at 2 degrees Aries. Now, as I was preparing for this presentation, in order to figure out, the past versus current and doing research about past Neptune and Aries periods, I was really looking at back 165 years ago when Neptune was in Aries, what happened around the retrogrades of Neptune and Aries, right? Because, and this is a message for those that like astrology or into astrology and you're trying to study transits from the past. And a key that I would give is to look at when those planets went retrograde in the past and they were right newly in a new sign. Because you're going to find stories that really exemplify that energy at the time when it went retrograde. Okay. So I think a date we really need to keep in our pocket is July 4th, Neptune retrograding in Aries. And then, like I said earlier about that Gandanta point and the energy moving back into Pisces, going from Aries to Pisces, on October 22nd, Neptune is in its retrogradation and it goes back into Pisces, and it's at 29 degrees Pisces for pretty much the rest of the year in 2025 until Neptune finally moves into Aries for good on January 26th of 2026. Okay. So if you have planets between 27 degrees Pisces and 2 degrees Aries, you, my friend, are in the Neptune hot zone for next year. You are definitely in that hot zone. And I want to talk a little bit about, like, personally, how this may be affecting people. I especially want to speak to people who are Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, or if you have major planets in the early degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn. And for those of you that do, on the left hand or the right hand side of the screen is a girl who looks very buttoned down. She looks very type A. She looks like she's always on time for work. She looks like she has all her clothes laid out the night before she goes to work. Very timely, very type A personality. Okay. So for my cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, if you're a very type A person and you've got planets at early degrees of those 4 signs, you may feel like when Neptune goes into Aries, like all of a sudden the world has suddenly become very flaky. Okay. Hey, I called this person 100 times. They didn't call me back. Hey, is everybody out to lunch today? Does nobody know what's going on? What the hell is going on? Right. So there may be some of that energy for really buttoned up type A personalities as Neptune is moving into Aries, and you're like, oh gosh, like everyone's really flaky. And if you normally are not very sensitive and you have planets at those early degrees, you may find that all of a sudden, like, you are getting very sensitive. You're very sensitive to smells or foods or perfumes, and that you have this craving to escape everyday life. And maybe you're showing a renewed interest in spirituality, religion, dream analysis, Tai Chi, yoga, spiritual movement, or spiritual pilgrimage. Okay. Loud noises may be bothering you, and you may need more peace and quiet and less activity. And some of you may also feel that you need to break away from a guru or a teacher and start your own class or group. Okay. And so I think that this energy may be a little bit challenging for people that are more type A, but if you're not super type A and you are good to go with the flow, you may be able to handle Neptune coming into your sign a little bit easier. Okay. And yeah. Yeah. And yeah. Oh gosh, Aries first house here with the moon. Yeah. Yeah. So for individuals, I wanted to talk a little bit about positive versus negative with Neptune and Aries. Okay, so we may see with Neptune and Aries, we may see visionary leaders. Okay, and I actually have a prediction to make that during March or April of 2025 of this coming year, that there will be a birth of a future visionary world leader. Okay, there's some epic eclipses and energy in March of 2025 and also moving into April. And I actually am going to put that down as a prediction that I'm making. And of course, we won't know much later into the future, but I actually think during March or April of 2025, a visionary world leader could be getting born. And that's an interesting thing. So with Neptune and Aries, we could have some visionary leaders, but we may also have impotent leaders or leaders who are totally incompetent. Aries is a sign of leadership and Neptune is confusion. And so we may have confused leaders that are, I don't know, I have no idea. And maybe some of you have felt that energy when you've gone to work at a company and it's your first day and no one knows what the hell they're doing and what the hell that they're doing, and nobody can train you and no one can help you, and you're just walking around in a phase, like in a daze, like, oh, I don't know what to do, right? There's no one here to help me or to train me. That's very Neptune and Aries. And then there's always that person that takes it upon themselves to make sure that that never happens again and make sure that the next person that comes knows what to do, right? But there could be some very impotent leaders. And with Neptune and Aries, we may also see like an eagerness to start things, but getting impatient with results. Neptune and Aries could be like the wilderness explorer, but it could also be the lost wanderer who doesn't want to ask for directions. Neptune and Aries can represent fearless spiritual self-expression versus easily fazed by challenges and giving up. And I don't know if any of you have ever read the book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, but that is a very famous book, and it may be required reading for the Neptune and Aries transit, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And so we have the peaceful warrior here versus getting attacked for one's spiritual beliefs. Okay. So those are some positive and negative things about Neptune and Aries that could come in. And now I want to switch over from talking about the individual to talking to more about the collective. And every time we do a transit, I'm going to talk this way. I'm going to do first the individual and then the collective. And so the last time Neptune was in Aries, the Civil War was going on in the United States. Now, I'm only bringing this up. I'm not bringing it up to say there's going to be another Civil War or there is a, I'm not bringing it up for those purposes. I actually wanted to pull the first 3 dates that Neptune retrograde in Aries as a way to look at or predict what are some possible issues that may come up in 2025 on a grander world scale as it relates to Neptune and Aries. Okay, so I pulled the days from 1861, 1862, and 1863 that Neptune went retrograde in the early degrees of Aries. Okay, and I just wanted to point out some things that I found because it's quite interesting. And for those of you that are not in the United States, I get it. If you're like, this part is boring, all right, but we'll try to we'll try to get through it, okay? So the first Neptune retrograde in Aries was on July 4th of 1861 when Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus and called up the militia. Now, habeas corpus is something that is a right given in the Constitution to American citizens to allow us to challenge unlawful detention. It kind of reminds me of those cop shows where people are like, you can't keep me here forever. You don't have anything on me. I'm leaving, right? And they can't unlawfully detain you. So that is habeas corpus. It's a legal petition that can be used to challenge the detention of an individual by ICE. Okay. So ICE in the United States is an immigration service that, like, I don't know if they're a service. They can kick you out of the country, basically. And, we've only had one time in our country when habeas corpus was suspended, and that was with Abraham Lincoln on July 4th, 1861, on the day that Neptune went retrograde in Aries, okay, was when he called up the militia and suspended habeas corpus. Now, because we're going to next year be having a major issue with mass deportations and stuff and immigrants, the issue of habeas corpus could come up again. It came up during Donald Trump's presidency before, but in order to get rid of habeas corpus, there needs to be either an invasion or a rebellion, or when public safety requires it. So presidents in the past have looked at trying to suspend habeas corpus, like George Bush after 9/11, but it's not really been done. Now, because it actually got done during the first Neptune retrograde in Aries in 1861, what's going to happen when we have our first Neptune when we have Neptune in Aries, and we're having this whole thing about, habeas corpus and the Constitution protecting their right not to be illegally detained by our country. So there's stuff going on with that. And one of my, mundane predictions is, how will habeas corpus, or lack thereof, aid in the mass deportation of immigrants? And will we see challenges to habeas corpus and illegal detention of those in opposition to the government, protesters, or immigrants being illegally detained? Will immigrants have a chance to enlist in the army for a chance at citizenship so that they can stay? Those are all things that were going on during the Civil War when Neptune was in Aries. And I do think there's going to be issues with habeas corpus. Now, the next Neptune in Aries issue that we had was on July 7th of 1862. Neptune went retrograde in Aries at 3 degrees Aries. And at this time, the U.S. military, for the first time ever, allowed African Americans to be in the military. And they also passed a law to allow states to draft militia if they can't meet their quota. Now, at the time, African Americans still faced unequal treatment, lower pay, and withheld medical care. And some argued that Congress shouldn't have no power in saying who is allowed in the military or not. Now, this is an interesting thing. This happened during Neptune in Aries, right around the retrograde of Neptune in Aries the following year. And it's interesting in the United States because we have a nominee for Secretary of Defense who is saying that women should not be allowed in combat roles. And they're talking about banning transgender, LGBTQ folks in the military. And there's this big attack that they're saying they're going to do on the woke military. And my question with this one is, will we see problems with recruiting in the military? Not just in the United States, mind you, but all over the world. Will we see problems with recruitment into the military and the barring of certain people from serving in the military, or the mistreatment of marginalized groups that are in the military? Okay, so I think that is something that is definitely could be coming up next year. Or, Neptune's going to be in Aries for 14 years. And I think, military desertions, embarrassing military defeats, especially with Saturn in Aries as well, is something that is going to come up. And are they going to be able to find people to enlist, right? Now, this is the most compelling example. So I really want to draw your attention to this Neptune retrograde in Aries that happened on July 9th of 1863. So mind you, in 1863, the United States for the first time passed the Military Enrollment Act, which allowed our country to draft people into military service. Okay, this happened during Neptune and Aries. And the very first draft in our country was held on July 11th of 1863, 2 days after Mercury, 2 days after Neptune went retrograde in Aries. Okay, we held in our country the very first draft ever. And as a result of that draft that was held in 1863, 2 days after that, huge riots and demonstrations broke out in the streets of New York City. And at that time in 1863, it was the deadliest riot in US history. Millions in property damage. It left many people homeless, and it turned into a race riot and a class riot, fueling more racial tensions. And part of that is because people could get away from participating in the draft if they paid enough money. But poor people and immigrants and people from marginalized communities didn't have money to pay for that. And so they were going to be drafted, and people were taking it to the streets and in New York City and going crazy over it. And this happened right on the Neptune retrograde in Aries. Extremely compelling example. And there was a movie made about this riot, and it is called Gangs of New York. It's a 2002 movie about the riots of 1863. I just watched it the other day. Definitely give it a watch to prepare for Neptune and Aries. And one question I have for 2025 predictions is, are we going to see record low numbers of enlistments in the military? Are we going to see a threat of a draft? What about riots related to military issues? They've talked about cutting veterans' benefits. Are we going to have a lot of protests about that? Okay. Are we going to have protests about military issues? Okay. And I feel like this is also going to come up for other countries too, like, military desertions, military surrenders, military failures, hasty military retreats. There could be a lot of things that are going on with that. And Anahira says, you've been concerned about conscription drafts happening again. Yeah, Neptune and Aries. And yeah, it was a big thing. And actually, the UK, I believe, in 1703 had their first conscription draft law. And that was the year that Saturn was in conjunction with Neptune and Aries in 1703. And the UK had their first draft law. So that's interesting too. So this Neptune and Aries stuff is wild. Now, there's a lot of military stuff that's going to come up. And this is the President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense. And I don't know if he's going to actually make it through, or if he's going to, because they found out that he's an alcoholic. He has a Sun opposite Neptune opposition in his chart. He actually has a time chart. This is Pete Hegseth, who is Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense to lead our military. And this guy has never ran anything in his life. He was a mid-level National Guard officer. Beyond that, he doesn't really have any significant military experience, and he's never led anything really. And if he was put in charge, he would be leading an organization in charge of 3 million plus employees. And this guy has sexual abuse allegations against him and is a white Christian nationalist. And this is who they want to. He's a Fox News host. He's actually a news host on TV that Trump wants to appoint as the Secretary of Defense. And it's like, okay, talk about incompetent leadership, right? And if he does get in, this could really be the face of incompetent leaders. And so I don't mean to laugh at it, but it's just the astrology is funny to me. In this case, it is really, really funny. And yeah, goofy face. Yeah, he has got a goofy face indeed. And he's supposed to be leading our military. It's okay. So that's Neptune and Aries, okay? It's going to be an interesting time. We've got 14 years to deal with the energy. There's a lot that's going to come up. Next, I want to transition over to Saturn and Aries. Okay. Now, at this point, if you're saying to yourself, Natalie, I thought Neptune was going into Aries. Now, is Saturn going into Aries too? Yes, it is. And if you're saying, well, if Neptune is going into Aries, doesn't that mean that Saturn is going to be with Neptune and Aries together if they go into Aries around the same time? Yes, you've got it. And again, this is another planet that I mentioned that is Gandanta, that is going from, Pisces to Aries and then back to Pisces and back to Aries. So this is another Gandanta planet that is in the hot zone from the end of Pisces to early Aries. And I think it's worth noting that Neptune goes into Aries first, and then Saturn goes into Aries a couple months later on May 24th, 2025. We're going to get a taste of Saturn in Aries. And for the first part of the year, we're going to be speeding through. Saturn's going to be speeding through Pisces. And then it's going to hit Saturn in Aries on May 24th. And then on July 13th, we're going to have our first retrograde of Saturn in Aries. Now, that is around the same time that, guess what? Neptune is going retrograde. So the month of July of next year is going to be wild. Like, it is going to be interesting because Neptune's retrograding in Aries for the first time. Saturn's retrograding in Aries for the first time. And we also see on September 1st, Saturn regressing into the sign of Pisces at 29 degrees. And then finally, in February of 2026, Saturn goes into Aries for good. But we're going to have Saturn bouncing back and forth between Pisces and Aries all year long. And this is interesting energy here and I put so hot, it's cold. Saturn and Aries, okay? So this is more where I'm talking about the individual aspect of Saturn and Aries, okay? We'll get to more of the collective energy in a little bit here, but first I just want to talk about like the individual and how they may experience it. And Aries is assertive, willful, independent, direct, doing everything at full throttle, and has a readiness to meet challenges. Whereas Saturn is about delay, caution, fear, denial, hardship, and endurance. Saturn teaches Aries to be patient and take measured action, and Aries teaches Saturn to have confidence and pride in one's abilities to handle the ups and downs. Now, we know that Saturn is in fall in Aries, and that Saturn doesn't really like being in Aries. It's a tough position for Saturn, but it is a weaker Saturn. But a lot of times in our weakness is our strength, and some people can overcompensate for weakness by acting hard. And I think that's something that can happen with Saturn and Aries. It's like something is weak, and so a person is overcompensating by kind of acting hard. And this could also be like a tyrant who knows he's weak, but is acting out and trying to act tough. And I think with Saturn moving into Aries and Neptune moving it into Aries, like it is a year where we need to fortify our fire energy and take care of our fire energy for sure. And I want to talk about what will Saturn and Aries be like. And one story that I like to tell about Saturn and Aries is Will Smith, the actor. For those of you that know who he is, obviously he is a famous actor. And he has Saturn and Aries in both his Vedic Indian astrology chart and in his Western chart. And do you guys remember in 2002 when Will Smith was getting at the Academy Awards, when he was getting an award for his role as King Richard, and Chris Rock was presenting, and Chris Rock started talking crap about his wife, and he got up in the middle of Chris Rock's monologue and like slapped him across the face, right? Okay, so that's a Saturn and Aries moment. And one thing we need to like think about with Saturn and Aries is, you know, that night Will Smith was getting an award. He actually won an Academy Award that night, but then he also ended up having to apologize to the Academy for interrupting the show and slapping someone, right? So with Saturn and Aries, we just have to be a little bit careful that at the highest highs of a moment of winning, we don't get too cocky or we don't get too out of control and do something we shouldn't. And with Saturn and Aries, we may see embarrassing failures stemming from impulsive actions. We may also have tests of endurance with Saturn and Aries. We may have hard labor but delayed action. Self-reliance is tested. We may also have tempers that are out of control, or we may have a situation where being assertive is challenging. If you've ever worked for a boss who had a hard time setting rules and expectations and let people walk all over them and it was always chaos, you know what I mean by that energy of when somebody has a problem being assertive, which we may have that with Saturn and Aries a little bit. Now, for people that were born between 1967 and 1969, you will be going through your second Saturn return for your Saturn and Aries, and people born between 1996 and 1999, you will also be having your Saturn return coming up as well. And so that is something to think about with the old Saturn and Aries. And yeah, Saturn and Aries feels like a dry desert. Yeah, because Saturn is a very dry planet and Mars is a very hot and dry energy as well. And so is Aries. So that is, yeah, that's a very dry desert for sure. And one thing I think we could see with Saturn and Aries as a prediction is poor sportsmanship. Now, Aries is a sign of, you know, athleticism and competition and, you know, putting your best foot forward. But what we may see is we may see people that have a very poor attitude when it comes to sportsmanship. And it's interesting because the sun is exalted in Aries, but when Saturn is in Aries, we may have some problems with authority that are really coming out. And we can already see it kind of bubbling up with the assassination of the CEO that happened, you know, a week ago or whenever it was. We can see, because the thing is that Saturn absolutely hates anything elite. Saturn hates VIP. It doesn't like anything elite. And Saturn is not liking the haves, right? The people that have it all. Saturn hates that. And Saturn gets pretty pissed off. There can be a very angry aspect to Saturn. If Saturn feels like treatment isn't fair, there can be a very angry aspect to Saturn, and definitely issues with authority coming up and things not being fair and people getting very testy about things. The hard part about poor sportsmanship is that it makes it so competing isn't really fun anymore, or athleticism isn't really fun anymore. We may also see with, you know, one person kind of ruining it for everyone with like a bad apple theme coming up. And Saturn and Aries can also be where our confidence takes a huge nosedive. Like we think we're like so confident, we're on top of things, and then boom, we kind of come crashing down. But I do think like, you know, officials and authorities being targeted, because Aries is the sign of the sun's exaltation and Saturn is an enemy of the sun. Saturn hates the sun. Hates the sun. Doesn't like it, okay? Not any day of the week does Saturn like the sun. And so, yeah, there's going to be, I feel like, pushback over nepotism, pushback at authorities when things are not fair. Definitely coming up with Saturn and Aries. And and comparing Saturn and Aries to Saturn and Pisces is kind of funny because with Saturn and Aries, we could have grumpy, pissed off complainers with no patience. That's very Saturn and Aries versus passive acceptance of the destructive wave, right? Um, so I think that really comes through with Saturn and Aries. And a couple of things that Saturn is for the people. Saturn is a commie. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Saturn does not like anything elite at all. Saturn is like, get that shit out of here. And with Saturn and Aries, we may see some very unlikely heroes that pop up. But we may also see some, temper tantrums that get a little out of control. And some aspects that may come up would be like a positive side would be the tenacity to push forward, Saturn and Aries, versus just giving up and saying, fuck it. We can experience with Saturn and Aries, we can face anger. Facing anger forces growth, or in order to have growth, we need to face our anger. But there could also be like a lot of problems with authority figures coming up as well. With Saturn and Aries, we could see humble leaders versus on a negative end, we could see sore losers and self-righteous winners coming up with Saturn and Aries. Saturn and Aries could also be committed action, or on the opposite, lack of motivation and nihilistic attitudes. And the one thing that I predict about Saturn and Aries that people are going to hate like the frickin' plague is time wasters. That is a major, major issue with Saturn and Aries. People being absolutely allergic to time wasting and getting really frustrated with people wasting their time. People already hate it, but I feel like it's going to become, punishable by capital punishment if people are wasting other people's time. Like, that is wrong and bad and no. So I feel like that may be a major issue coming up with Saturn and Aries. Like, time wasters, no thank you. And now that we've talked a little bit about the personal side of Saturn and Aries, I'm going to switch over to the mundane collective aspect of it. So, in order to dissect what may come in the future from Saturn and Aries, I really went back in time and looked at Saturn and Aries in 1937 and 1938. I looked at Saturn and Aries at the end of the 60s and at the end of the 90s. Those are the last 3 times that Saturn has been in Aries. And I looked at what happened when Saturn either entered Aries or retrograded in Aries to look at what was that energy about at that particular time in history. Now, let me take a quick drink of water, and yeah. Okay. So for Saturn and Aries in 1937 and 1938, Saturn entered Aries on April 25th, 1937. From May, which is a month later, from May of 1937 to June of 1938, the early degrees of Saturn and Aries, with retrogrades back into the late degrees of Pisces, were happening during that year. Basically the same thing that we're going to be going through next year. During this time frame, the US had a deep recession, okay? GDP fell by 10%, unemployment was 20%, and production plummeted to 32%. An unexpected severe economic downturn took place. Now, keep in mind, in 1937, we were in mid-recovery after the Great Depression, and in 1933, things started to look better after the Great Depression. But in 1937, right as Saturn went into Aries, we had a double dip recession that basically everything went down, everything plummeted with Saturn's entrance into Aries. And, when you think about Saturn and Aries, you can think about false starts or failed launches, or fast progress coming to a dead stop. And that's what happened with our economy. We were on the way to some type of recovery, perhaps from the Great Depression, but everything took a downhill, went really, really downhill. And one question I have for the US is, and for the world really, is we've all been, trying to recover after COVID, right? And we've all, the economy trying to recover after COVID, etc. It sucked. It's not been easy. It's been really bad. But now with, our new president, he's wanting to add tariffs, which is like a tax onto goods, and that inflates goods even higher. And so my question is, are we doomed to repeat the past with this Saturn and Aries energy of we're trying to recover, we're trying to post-COVID, and then we have these policies that push us into an unexpected, severe economic problem. And what's interesting is in this picture, this is a famous picture from that era when everything started crashing again. And this guy is walking down the street wearing a sign that says, "I voted for ham and eggs," which is interesting because this 2024 election was supposedly all about the price of eggs. And this sign this guy is wearing is saying, "I voted for ham and eggs." And the guy next to him is wearing a sign that says, "I believed in the banks." Okay. And this idea of disillusionment and "I believed in the banks," that's very Saturn in Pisces. And this "I voted for ham and eggs being this big thing in the 2024 election. So my question is, are these tariffs and things like that going to drive us into an unexpected severe economic downturn? Okay. And this is a question for other countries too, as well. Like what, Saturn and Aries showing its teeth there. Now, the next Saturn and Aries thing I would like to discuss is what happened in 1967 and 1968. Okay. Now, I went, and this was when in the 60s when Saturn was in Aries. Now, I looked at July 25th, 1967, when Saturn went retrograde in Aries. Now, 2 days before Saturn went retrograde into Aries, 2 days before that, we had what was called the Detroit riots of 1967, which lasted 5 days and resulted in violent confrontations between the police and the city's Black population. And this riot is considered the catalyst for the Black Power movement. It was the bloodiest urban riot in the US during the long, hot summer of 1967. And articles have compared it to being as bad, if not worse, than the draft riots that happened in 1863 when Neptune went retrograde in Aries. Now that blew my frickin' mind because right here we have a reference to that major riot that was the biggest in history in the United States that happened when Neptune went retrograde in Aries. And now we have Saturn retrograding in Aries. And later on down the road, we have the biggest riot ever, okay, since 1863. And this is what tipped me off to the fact that Kamala Harris wasn't going to win. Because I was like, okay, I mean, I know, like, we could still have riots, we could still have shit going on, but to have, like, we all remember when Donald Trump was president in 2017, 2018, and 2019, and there were huge racial tensions going on, and there were riots all over the place, okay? Now we have it again, and now we have it in this even bigger context, and now it's coming up again, okay? And it's going back in history, and it just clued me in that next year and the years following, as we continue with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, that there is going to be problems with this, riots and things going on and protests and things like that. And some of them may turn very violent, as we've already seen and known. And so I just wanted to bring that up because it is coming and it's something we need to be aware of. So we know where we stand, right? As I talked about earlier, with the individual needing to center themselves, like where they are and what they believe in, what I spoke about earlier about that. Also, we had 2 high-level assassinations while Saturn was in Aries. Martin Luther King was assassinated during Saturn in Aries, and so was JFK. So that tipped me off that next year and the years that follow could have, police brutality, race riots, anger unleashed in the streets. And yeah, anyway, I'm not gonna, I don't want to be too much of a downer. We'll move on from this, but yeah, Saturn and Aries, like a totally, yeah, yep, and yeah, and I know, Pinky, I know it is wild. And then I also looked at Saturn and Aries. Now, the one thing that we didn't have during those periods was Pluto and Aquarius, and that may actually, and Pluto is going to be trining Saturn and Neptune, or not trining, sextiling Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. So we may not see all of this go down. I'm just saying, there's this potential that's kind of in the air, and the astrology kind of confirms it, but we have other things going on besides just this energy. So that's good because other things may happen. But next time we had Saturn and Aries was at the end of the 90s in 1996 and 1997. And right before, the day before Saturn went retrograde that year, there was a huge airplane crash that killed 230 people on board. And then the following year, 5 days after Saturn retrograde, there was another huge airplane crash that happened as well. And then later that month, there was a huge dive in the stock market that really fueled the Asian global financial crisis. So, gosh, I hope we don't have any plane disasters in the next couple of years. But there may be something with that. And, there's a lot of explosions that were kind of happening right around Saturn retrogrades that I noticed. So we want to keep our eye out for disasters and explosions that we can't walk around afraid, but we just need to be aware of our surroundings, I think. We also saw a couple of very high level killings as well. In 1996 and 1997, Tupac was killed in 1996, right around Saturn retrograde, and Princess Diana was also killed the following year during the same month that Saturn went retrograde in Aries. So we do need to kind of watch that energy, I feel, and especially the economic energy as well that we were talking about. And so those are some tough I wish I had some happy examples. I'm sure we'll have happy moments too. But so the next thing I wanted to move on and just talk about very quickly, because I'm probably going to talk more about this in 2026. I know I will, not probably, I will. But I want to talk about Saturn Neptune conjunctions, because as we know, Saturn's in Aries. Next year will be in Aries, so will Neptune. They're making a conjunction. Okay, Saturn-Neptune conjunctions happen once every 36 years. The last time that we had one was in the late 80s and early 90s when Saturn and Neptune were in conjunction in Capricorn. And that was around the time that the Berlin Wall came down. So that was an interesting dissolving of structures. Now, when we think of Saturn-Neptune, Saturn creates structure, Neptune dissolves structure. And so we saw that happened last time with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the late 80s, early 90s, the fall of the Berlin Wall. But we also saw Saturn-Neptune conjunctions can oftentimes lead into economic recessions or hardships. And we saw a stock market crash that happened during the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn in 1989 called Black Friday. And that is kind of what led into the recession of the early 90s. And so these are some things that may come up. And um, as we know, like we can see, I have a chart here up on the screen that shows the day that Saturn goes retrograde. Neptune is already retrograde right here, but then we see Saturn retrograde right next to it. Okay. And then I kind of feel, because Neptune goes into Aries first and then Saturn follows, I kind of feel that it's kind of an aspect of saying, do you have what it takes? Do you have the grit to fight through and get what you want, or get towards what you want? I kind of feel that some of that Saturn and Aries energy. We also have Jupiter newly in Cancer in this particular chart, squaring the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. And this is going to be an interesting time, June and July, because as soon as Jupiter goes into Cancer next year, it's going to be met with Saturn and Neptune. So Jupiter has a very tough introduction into Cancer next year, but later on in the year, it moves on and it gets better, is what I feel. But I also feel that anyone taking on a leadership position next year is going to be having a very hard time, because it's like, I want to be the leader and I want to be in charge, but now that I'm in charge, the responsibility is killing me. And I also feel that for those of us that are really depressed and sad about, the state of the country and what happens next and these awful leaders, I actually like Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, because I feel like a lot of these people are going to have a really hard time getting anything done, because there is going to be confusion. There is going to be blockages. There is going to be like, who's the leader, who's in charge, everything's getting fucked up. And that actually makes me smile, because I feel like the people that are trying to institute new changes that are very bad for the populace are going to have a hard time instituting those changes, because everything's kind of a clusterfuck, is what I think. And yeah, so I think that that is very interesting. I want to just mention later on in the year, when we see the Jupiter squaring the Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. And a question that came up for me when I was looking at Saturn and Neptune and Aries squaring Jupiter and Cancer. Now, mind you, this energy doesn't come up until like June or July of next year. But one question that came up to me is, how comfortable are you with failure and disappointment as a learning process, right? With Jupiter, right, we have Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, right? Saturn shows us that failure is inevitable sometimes, but learning is optional, right? We all fail, but do we have the ability to learn from our mistakes? And how comfortable are we with learning through those failures and disappointments? But the hard part of it may be watching other people who are very incompetent continue to fail upwards and just keep getting promoted, and people continuing to fail upwards until a lesson is learned, is a breeding ground for incompetence and clueless management and clueless leaders. And some of you may be noticing this in your workplace next year, like around June and July. You know what? These incompetent, weird people are getting promoted to these leadership positions. All they do is keep failing. They don't know what they're doing, and they keep getting promoted. So if you see that happening, take heart. Know that the astrology is kind of encouraging it, but inevitably there's going to be ethical failures. There's going to be failures that happen, and those people are going to be caught in a catch-22 because they're not going to know how to lead what they've been entrusted to do. And I put here, watching incompetent leaders rise to the top can be demoralizing. Jupiter in Cancer square Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. and dissolving structures impulsively, right? What do I mean when I mean by dissolving structures impulsively? Okay. Well, first of all, the impulsive energy is Aries, and Saturn Neptune is the energy of dissolving structures. So, anyone who is trying to dissolve structures impulsively, that can lead to long term chaos and consequences as we see Saturn and Neptune shift back into Pisces. And so these are some things that may be going on next year. There may be a lot of exhaustion around having to constantly expend energy to be seen as the winner and to be on top of things. That may become very exhausting. And so we may have to check ourselves in those dynamics and take a beat on it. Also, I feel with Jupiter and Cancer squaring this Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries is our ability to grow in the environment that we are in is being tested. And I feel like this is kind of like a workplace thing too, that some of you may notice next year, like that your company is having these hypocritical, I care about the people messages. We care about you as a person. We want to be empathetic to you, Jupiter and Cancer. You're like family, right? You're an employee here, but you're like family. And they're giving this, like, we love the people kind of a message, but their actions, Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, do not line up with their emotional statements. And some of you may find this in relationships too, where people are like promising the world, Jupiter and Cancer, but their actions are not lining up. And it kind of reminds me like at companies where they say, like, you should feel comfortable taking time off or requesting time off because we're all like a family here. But then when you go to take time off, they punish you for it. They, they don't support it, right? And so this is where things can get hypocritical with support and words of, affirmation emotionally, Jupiter and Cancer, and where we may feel like people are acting like they care about me, but they don't really care about me. And their actions are falling short of their professed ideals. Okay, Jupiter and Cancer. So I think this is something that we really need to pay attention to next year, and also unethical leadership and ethics breakdowns because there is unethical leadership. And not just in the country, but it could be an energy coming up all over the workplace or in friendships as well, or in relationships. And so that is something to keep in mind that we need to think about next year. And the last point that I want to make about Saturn Neptune, and then I'm going to move into Uranus Gemini for next year. The last point that I want to make about the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries with retrograde back into Pisces is that a lot of people avoid being confronted or challenged by creating an intimidating persona that is compensating for an insecurity. And this is something that we are going to see a huge energy around in 2025. People avoiding being confronted or challenged by creating an intimidating persona that is compensating for an insecurity. And the challenge is going to be to develop our assertive self in a much more balanced way, and to maintain a healthy competitive drive without a constant pressure to win. I also feel like next year we've got the South Node in Virgo, so directions may be very vague, and it's easy to quit and give up before we allow something to grow with the square to Jupiter, okay? So these are some important things to remember about next year. And if you see people acting tougher than they need to act, or wasting a lot of energy creating a challenging persona or an intimidating persona, they are compensating for an insecurity. And with the Saturn Neptune conjunction next year, some people may be feeling pretty down in the dumps, or kind of feeling like failure, or feeling like nothing is worth it. And I just want to encourage people, because we've had other Saturn Neptune things happen in the past. And this picture up on the screen is actually from an album that I listen to all the time. In 2006, right off the tail of the Saturn Neptune opposition that was happening in 2004, 2005, and a little bit in 2006. And for those of you that remember 2004, 2005, 2006, President Bush at the time won a second election, and everyone felt like there was something wrong with it, like it was fixed, and it was a very close election, and there was a lot of people really disappointed that he got reelected again. People were very discouraged with that, very depressed about it. There was Hurricane Katrina that happened at the time during the Saturn-Neptune opposition. There were deadly tsunamis around the world. And I remember in the year 2006 listening to an album called Under the Iron Sea, and by a band called Keen. And Keen is a British band that put out this album in 2006 when the Saturn-Neptune opposition was going on. And I just remember thinking, wow, like the album title, Under the Iron Sea, that is so Saturn-Neptune. And that feeling of feeling very pessimistic or depressed or sad about the way that things are turning out, it really came up for me as I was like listening to this album then. And there's a song on the album called Nothing in My Way. And the lyrics are like, it's just another day, nothing in my way. I like basically there's nothing left to say. I don't want to go. I don't want to stay. So there's nothing left to say. And why do you lie when you want to die, when you hurt inside? Don't know what you lie for anyway. Now there's nothing left to say. And the refrain of the song is like, for a lonely soul, you're having such a good time. For a lonely soul, you're having such a good time, over and over. It's a really interesting album, interesting song. It's very Saturn Neptune. And if you feel discouraged next year and you feel sad and you feel down about everything happening, just know that we have felt this before. We've had this before. We're going to get through it. With Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, it's a challenge to keep hope alive and keep the energy going. And one way to do that is to stimulate ourselves with art, music, poetry, and film that creates a sense of wonder to help us keep going. And I actually love this album cover because it's like dragons are like leaping out of the sea. And I think it's even more relevant with the North Node going into Pisces next year. And what interesting imagery is all I have to say about that, my friends. Okay. Now, in my forecast for 2026, a year from now, I'm going to have a lot more to say about that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, but I just wanted to share that with you. Now, switching gears entirely, we are going to be switching over to Uranus into Gemini, okay? And you're like, I feel some of you are like, I've been waiting for this. We've been talking about Saturn Neptune this whole dang time. Let's finally get into some Uranus into Gemini. Completely different energy, completely different vibes, okay? And so Uranus has not been in the sign of Gemini since the 1940s. Uranus takes about 84 years to make it through the entire zodiac. And for the last 7 years, we've had Uranus in Taurus. And finally in 2025, we're going to get a taste of Uranus in Gemini. And Uranus goes into Gemini on July 7th. Right around the time that Saturn and Neptune are going retrograde, mind you. But we have on July 7th, we have Uranus into Gemini. Now, again, Uranus is another planet that's going to be dancing in the liminal between Taurus and Gemini. And we're going to see our very first retrograde on September 6th of Uranus retrograding in Gemini. For the first time in 84 years, we're going to have a Uranus in Gemini retrograde. We'll also have Uranus slip back into Taurus for a little bit But then in April of 2026, we have Uranus going into Gemini for good. But for those of you that have planets between 27 Taurus and 1 degree Gemini, like if you have planets in that zone, you are again in the hot zone for the Uranus into Gemini transition happening. Okay. Now, Uranus is not Gandanta. It's not doing an Aries Pisces thing. It's not like the energy we've been talking about before. But we are going to see some major changes actually with Uranus. And I love this art, this imagery for Uranus into Gemini and just the quirkiness of it. We need to quickly have a word on Uranus. So Uranus as a planet is associated sometimes with difficulties with others or working with others, but Uranus is a very avant-garde energy with avant-garde thinkers, very perceptive thinking, intuitive, quirky, bringing two opposites together, living in a paradox, flashes of insight and breakthrough, radical new experiences. Okay, so wherever you have Gemini in your chart, you're gonna be feeling some new energy. Yay! And yeah, we have freedom of expression, flashes of genius. But Uranus can also be where we are not able to relate to other people too easily, where we can become rebellious or purposely willful. We know that we've had Uranus in Taurus, and Taurus is a very like domestic sign. For the last 7 years, we've seen changes to crypto, changes to our financial systems. Also, with the domestic aspect of Uranus and Taurus, we've seen off-grid living, van life, tiny houses, and working from home during Uranus and Taurus. So what might we see with Uranus into Gemini? And yeah, I'm so excited for Uranus into Gemini. Oh boy. I have Mercury in Gemini, so I'm like, yeah, let's go. All right, what will it be like? And I love this image of this guy riding a rocket with his computer, and it's like, whoa. But what will it be like? Podcasts, new info, platforms galore, rapid changes in travel and transport and communication. Will we get flying cars? Will we get constantly self-driving? Like, what are we going to get? It's so exciting, right? New sciences and intellectual styles, lightning fast info. I mean, info is already pretty fast as it is, but things are really going to with Uranus and Gemini. Taurus is like the slowest sign, and Uranus and Gemini is like the most air of the air. So, I mean, we are really going to be doing stuff differently with Uranus and Gemini. And one thing I want to give a shout out to is give a shout out to the air signs. Fellow Gemini, Libras, or Aquarius, it is your time to shine, my friends, as Uranus in Gemini is going to be trining your planets in Libra and Aquarius eventually, maybe not right away, because we're only going to get a couple, a degree or two into Uranus and Gemini. But over the next 7 years, yeah, your air planets are going to be reinvigorated by Uranus and Gemini. And yeah, for people that have planets in the early degrees of Gemini, Aquarius, or Libra, this is a time of significant learning and breakthrough. People need your expertise like never before. The world is moving very quickly, and who is going to help them decode the future? Air signs, right? Who's going to explain everything, implement it, and be 10 steps ahead with the latest gadgets? Air signs are going to do that. I was at a house the other day, and somebody had an Apple Smart TV remote, and I was like, there's no buttons on this damn remote controller, like there's no buttons. I was like, oh my God, like how funny. And I figured out how to use it right away, but I was like, this is interesting. This is new. All right, maybe I'm living in the dark, but these are some things, gadgets, new things, new ways of communicating, new ways of doing things. And as Uranus is entering into Gemini, it's going to be making a really cool trine to Pluto and Aquarius. And this could result over the next 3 to 4 years as this trine is going on. This could result in significant intellectual and scientific breakthroughs, space exploration, technology, communication, waste disposal, new ideas. We want to position ourselves to be a leader so we can take advantage of this transit. I feel like there's a lot of medical advances that are going to be coming up. It's going to be interesting reading up on the changes, and some people too, with Uranus and Gemini, trine Pluto and Aquarius, you may find books that totally blow your mind, developing like a deeper understanding of topics, attending lectures, finding cutting edge communities to get involved with. The big question is like, how can I get involved in all these new and exciting changes? And for air signs, I feel like you guys are really gonna thrive on this energy 100%. The people that may struggle with Uranus into Gemini would be more of the mutable signs. Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces may struggle a little bit with Uranus into Gemini, because it will be opposing or squaring your planets in either Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces. And that may result in kind of like a restless, scattered, I need to run away and break free from my life. You may feel like you're having a hard time relating to people, and there's major changes in your everyday life, so you can't really relate to people like you did before. And people may see you as becoming kind of erratic with things, but it's just because your life is like really changing on a big note. And Uranus can really change what we want and how we define ourselves. And I do feel like, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces are quite adaptable because they're mutable signs anyway. But you may feel really restless with the Uranus and Gemini energy. I also feel children are going to be uniquely impacted by Uranus into Gemini because Gemini's ruler Mercury is associated with children and the youth. I do feel like, some children may be really expanding and discovering new talents and skills, and certain children may be having like you're discovering your child has like a genius talent that you never knew about. Or if you're a teacher to children, you may notice that, wow, this kid has this incredible genius talent that I didn't even see before. Or you may find that the children that you're babysitting or watching or teaching, that they are being very disruptive, or they're very scattered, and it's hard to keep their attention. It's already hard enough to get their attention, but for example, like if you had a child that was Pisces rising and was having Uranus going through their fourth house, Uranus and Gemini in their fourth house, that child, their parents may be getting divorced, and then they have to go live with dad and mom, and they're all over the place, and they're moving all over the place. And of course, that can affect a child's ability to learn and kind of like sit still. And so I do think with Uranus and Gemini, it may be uniquely impacting children, or kids may be feeling like more rebellious, actually. The other thing that everyone should be keeping in mind of as well is that Gemini is a sign of like trickery, and Mercury does have to do with tricks and things like that. I don't know how many people have been called about their car warranty by by those scammers, or like who's been called by saying, hey, your car warranty is up, give us all your money, or whatever. People trying to steal your information. I do feel like with Uranus and Gemini, the schemers become doubly empowered in finding clever ways to rip people off. So this is an energy to watch out for, trickery, schemes, new schemes popping up that are very like genius or whatever. We will want to keep an eye out for that, I feel. And another thing I would like to mention, so I'd like to talk a little bit personally about positive versus negatives for Uranus into Gemini. So one thing with Uranus into Gemini, we may see random ideas taking form and becoming very genius. We may also, on a negative side, we may end up driving ourselves crazy with too many possibilities. Okay, so we want to be careful of that. On the positive, it can show Uranus into Gemini, like freedom of expression and speech. Or on the opposite end, no ability to understand each other or find agreement. Okay, like you're speaking this language, I'm speaking that language, we don't understand each other. Okay. Another positive thing could be experiments that yield enhancement for those with disabilities. And I feel even later, farther down the line, when Chiron goes into Gemini, like in 2037 and 2038, and it's trining Pluto in Aquarius, I feel we're going to have even more medical advances. But I feel Uranus in Gemini is going to be good for inventions and experiments that yield enhancements for those with disabilities. So that could be really cool. On the flip side, there could be little patience for those who are thinking differently. Okay. And then one more positive could be new and innovative ways of working and getting organized. But on the negative side could be a lack of deep insight or service level flimsy solutions to problems. So those are some things that we need to watch out with Uranus and Gemini. Also with Venus, when Venus goes into Gemini and Uranus is in Gemini, we may need to watch out for the flirty talking and playing around with no real commitment to a solid outcome. I think that part may come out a little bit in relationships, or people like second guessing their relationships, or one day I want to get divorced, the next day I'm fine, like that type of energy. Also with the South Node in Virgo next year, and Uranus in Gemini, there may be an energy of not taking the time to read the directions or study the details. Or there may be people who are absorbing information very quickly and then they're becoming bored if they're not challenged. Okay, so I also feel with Uranus and Gemini, the way that terms and conditions are done, or the way that contracts are done, could really be changed in the future going forward as well. So those are some things that I see with Uranus in Gemini. Now, I want to bring up just one thing as it relates to the past and mundane issues. And I want to talk about Uranus and Gemini in the 1940s for just a second, because we are having an exact repeat transit-wise of what happened in 1941. So on September 5th of 1941, Uranus, for the very first time, went retrograde at 0 degrees Gemini. At that same time, in September of 1941, there was a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse. There was a lunar eclipse in Pisces and a solar eclipse in Virgo. Now, we are having the exact same thing in 2025. On September 7th, September 6th, 2025, Uranus is going to retrograde in Gemini for the first time. And we're also having eclipses in Pisces and Virgo in September of next year. So track me there, because in 1941 September, we're having the exact same transits and eclipses that we're having now. And so I was like, well, if that's the case, what was going on in September of 1941? You guys are going to die when you see this. I was like, whoa. In September of 1941, September 18th and 19th of 41, when we were having our first Uranus retrograde in Gemini in 1941, the very first one, mind you, and eclipses in Pisces and Virgo, we had what was called the geomagnetic blitz of 1941. Now, at this time, first time Uranus went into Gemini and retrograded, the Earth experienced the most intense magnetic storm ever recorded. Okay, and this magnetic storm happened in 1941 during a time when radio and electrical technology was emerging as a central part of life. And what happened was a series of radio blackouts that interrupted broadcasts. Voltages surged in power lines, and auroras filled the air. And what you can see here is a beautiful picture of aurora. Also, at the time, the U.S. was not involved in World War II. We were getting close to getting involved in it, but we weren't there yet. But at that time, of that geomagnetic storm happened all over the world, right? That storm was happening all over the world. And in Europe, there was a World War II Allied attack against the Germans, and it lit up the night sky. It was supposed to be a secret attack, and it actually lit up the night sky. It was a magnetic superstorm. It was intense and complex and very long. And because the United States hadn't gotten involved totally in World War II yet, a lot of people were kind of freaking out about it because of the electrical blackouts and the surging power lines and the lights in the sky. People in the US were like, is it anti-aircraft? Are we having a national defense issue? Because we were being drawn into World War II at the time, some people actually wondered if it was an attack. And again, this happened right in between two eclipses in Pisces and Virgo, when Uranus and Gemini went retrograde for the very first time in 1941. We're having the exact same freaking transit in September of 2025. Uranus retrograde for the first time, eclipses in Virgo and Pisces at the same spot. And the interesting thing about it is that geomagnetic storms are predicted to increase in 2025 by NOAA. NOAA, they are the ones that forecast space weather. And they are suggesting, their modeling is suggesting that in July of 2025, there's going to be a peak geomagnetic storm, but they're saying it could happen either 2 months before or 2 months after. Now, if it's 2 months after, it's going to be in September, right along those eclipses, and it is going to be right when Uranus goes retrograde. We could be having a major geomagnetic storm. And when geomagnetic storms happen, we have widespread electrical disruptions. There can be persistent blackouts. There can be interruptions in global communication. If it goes on for a while, there can be crippled economies and also the endangerment of safety and livelihoods that are dependent on electrical structures. Also, I just want to throw in there that the Pentagon started to be built in September of 1941 as Uranus went into Gemini. So we may see some major changes with the Pentagon as well. But I just want to say this geomagnetic storm is literally what happened in September of 1941, and the same transits are coming around now. Now, one thing I wanted to point out to you guys as well is I wanted to point out to you guys a book by astrologer Christine Skinner. And she is one of the most intelligent and amazing financial astrologers that is out there. And she's based in London. She's an amazing astrologer. She has several books on financial astrology, and she writes about solar activity and the financial issues. And in this book, she talks about a 1926 study that suggested that wars, revolutions, and mass movements with their resulting political and economic consequences correlated to high sunspot activity. Now, why that is relevant is because we are ending an 11-year solar cycle in 2025, and it is associated with like a solar maximum or there being more sunspot activity. And when we have more sunspot activity, we can have geomagnetic blitzes, we can have, power disruptions, auroras, things going on like that. But they can also correlate to increased excitability, volcanic eruptions, and earth disturbances, and issues with the financial markets as well. And coronal mass ejections can bring market chaos and volatility in the markets. And it's also worth noting that during Saturn Neptune conjunctions, that can also indicate forthcoming economic hardships and recessions, according to one of the stock market crashes that happened in 1989 during the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, which led the way to the 1990 recession. So these are some things that I wanted to point out, and I wanted to point out the brilliant work of Christine Skinner and how she talks about solar activity and finance and the effect on financial markets. And certainly with Uranus and Gemini and the completion of solar cycle number 25 and the increased activity of solar activity, we may see a lot of market volatility next year as well. Okay, so that is really interesting. That really, when I found that out about 1941 and the connection there, I was like, oh my God, I literally had like a 5-minute astrology meltdown. It was wonderful. Okay, so now that we've talked about that, I want to move on to a little bit about Pluto in Aquarius in the Mars retrograde. Now, we know that Pluto went into Aquarius on November 19th of this year, and it's going to be there for good. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time in this presentation on Pluto in Aquarius or the Mars retrograde, because the Mars retrograde is going to end on February 23rd of next year. So, a month and a half into the year, the Mars retrograde is going to end. Now, that is not to downplay the energy of Mars retrograde or the Mars-Pluto opposition that is still going to be happening in late April and early May of next year, as we see Mars retraversing those old degrees of Leo and opposing an opposition to Pluto. So even though the Mars retrograde is going to end, and we currently enter Mars retrograde right now, but the Mars retrograde is going to end February 23rd. However, Mars is not going to get out of the way of Pluto until mid-May of 2025. So we are going to have more Mars-Pluto oppositions, and we just saw what happened during this Mars-Pluto opposition recently with South Korea declaring martial law and all the fighting, or the uprising in Georgia, and then we saw the assassination of a CEO in the United States. Like, there is a lot going on there. And for those of you that really want to get into the Mars-Pluto stuff, I recommend you watch my video called Mars and Leo opposite Pluto in Aquarius and the rise of incel power, or incel pride, which happened after the election in the United States. And I talk about Mars and Leo as being a charismatic, violent leader, and Pluto and Aquarius as being shadow communities emboldened to come out. And I talked about themes of injured pride and societal rejection and the enforcing of revenge on those who have been humiliated. Now, before the CEO was assassinated, I wrote that this Mars-Pluto energy could be about vicious grabs for power, theatrical drama, exciting vengeance that gets people really excited, and violent revolutionary impulses. Okay, so this is going on, and I mean, I was just like amazed that, right after the election, it just became, I mean, maybe I missed it, I don't know, but it became so clear that Elon Musk was really like, riding the coattails of Trump, and that this tech billionaire, Pluto in Aquarius, was like, had our country in a chokehold. And maybe tech billionaires have always had our country in a chokehold. I don't know. But it just became blatantly obvious, right? As we saw Pluto stationing and move, we saw it station earlier, and then we saw it move into Aquarius, and it was like, holy cow. Oh my God, So there's a lot going on with the Mars-Pluto opposition and all of that, which I covered in other videos. I also covered the assassination of the CEO in my video called My Empathy is Out of Network, and talked about Saturn and Pisces. So watch those videos if you want to go deeper there. I'm just talking about how basically for your own knowledge and information that, Mars isn't going to get out of Pluto's way really until late April and early May of next year. So we're going to have more Mars-Pluto opposition going on there. And for my folks who are watching from Australia, shout out to you. And I was like, whoa, because 9 days after Pluto went into Aquarius for good on November 28th, Australia passed a social media ban for children under 16, which is very Pluto in Aquarius. And you can also see right now, particularly in Virginia, in the state that I'm in, that there's all these news stories about schools threatening to say that kids can no longer have cell phones, not even during lunchtime. Like they're not even allowed to bring them. And so, or they have to keep them turned off and like hidden at all times. So I really think, like the ban on TikTok and, Australia and all this stuff, it's very Pluto and Aquarius. And, we had a big thing with the CEO assassination and the tie back to the French Revolution. Like we're just beginning to see the power of Pluto and Aquarius. There's a lot more there. I didn't dedicate a lot of this presentation to it because a lot of it is kind of, we've already talked about and covered in a lot of ways. I even have video underneath my astrology forecast of what Pluto and Aquarius means for you based on your rising sign. So take a look at that. But I just also wanted to talk about the sextiles and trines between the outer planets that are happening in 2025. As Uranus moves into Gemini, it's going to be trining Pluto. And the midpoint of that trine is going to be Neptune and Aries sextiling both of those. And I'll show you the chart really quick from back in July where it's really already happening. Here you can see Pluto and Aquarius. Here you can see Uranus and Gemini and Pluto and Aquarius making a trine to each other in July of 2025. And right in between there, at the midpoint, is Neptune making a sextile to Uranus and to Pluto. But for right now, at least, for 2025 and 2026, we have Saturn there, okay, in those early degrees of Aries. And I love the fact that people are celebratory about the fact that the outer planets are trining each other and, like how much revolution and design and robotics and AI and how cool everything's going to get. And I love all that, but I am a little bit of a party pooper because Saturn is there right now as well. For at least 2025 and 2026, Saturn is in those early degrees. And yeah, there is opportunities for a lot of like forward momentum and forward thinking and technology changes. But I also feel like with Saturn there, Saturn with Neptune in 2025 and 2026 shows the painful aspect of shifting into the new and how we can be discouraged to progress and the role of commitment and suffering in transitions and understanding our place in that in the larger context. And so I think Saturn waters it down a little bit, but I'll tell you guys one period that I'm already like pre-excited for. I am pre-excited for Chiron and Gemini trining Pluto and Aquarius in the years 2037 and 2038. Jupiter will also be in Gemini again during that time, just like we have Jupiter in Gemini right now. And I actually feel like we could see the curing of a lot of diseases and real help for people with disabilities, like, the robotic arm that actually works really, really good, that you can actually use and is really, I know we have stuff like that already, but I feel like we could really see some really positive improvements in, and I feel like we're going to start to see it with Uranus and Gemini trining Pluto and Aquarius, but I really feel Chiron in Gemini, trine Pluto in Aquarius in the years 2037, 2038, with Jupiter in Gemini there too, I feel like is going to be amazing for like medicine or healing or curing diseases or helping cure people with disabilities. I really feel that is going to be special. So, I mean, we do have things to look forward to. We do have really, good things to look forward to. And Anahira says that you think that Australia's sun is in Leo. I haven't looked yet, but Anahira, you bring up a really good point about the Pluto in Aquarius, because Israel, China, and Iran all have major planets either in Aquarius or in Leo. And so, that is crazy as far as, the Pluto and Aquarius stuff and activating stuff for Israel, China, or Iran. Like that is, and actually with Saturn Neptune is a little bit interesting too, because the president of China has a Saturn Neptune conjunction in his chart, and and Vladimir Putin has a Saturn Neptune conjunction in his chart. So these are all things that we need to kind of think of and keep an eye out for. So that is interesting, and I like the picture here for the Uranus trine Pluto and perhaps how technology could help, people with disabilities or help with, jobs or information or help industry, hopefully in some positive ways and not all just horrible, scary ways, God willing, right? Pluto, trine, Uranus, help us. And so let's go ahead and take a look at one thing that I have not covered yet is the Venus retrograde in 2025. So I love this image of Venus retrograde because she looks so strong and powerful in this photo. And you can see, Venus coming out of the water, and you see the sun at her back, and that Venus is going to be retrograde next year in the sign of Aries and moving back into Pisces. So again, we have that water fire thing going on. And we've got, the Gandanta again with Venus retrograding back into Pisces. But I love this photo. It looks like she's emerging from the water victorious. And I think it's going to be a Venus retrograde to remember. Keeping in mind that the last time Venus was retrograde in Aries was in 2017. So think about what was happening in 2017 for you, because Venus retrogrades repeat in the same spot every 8 years. And, what was happening globally at that time, well, at least in the US was, and globally, I think too, actually, all over the world was, women's marches, like a lot of people protesting Donald Trump coming into office and just, protesting for strong, vibrant women, women supporting women. And we may see that again this year with the Venus retrograde in Aries, like big women's marches and stuff like that, like we saw in 2017 when Venus was going retrograde in Aries, like the build up to that, basically. And so the Venus retrograde is going to start on March 1st at 10 degrees Aries, and it will take place from March 1st to April 12th. And if you have planets between 24 Pisces and 10 Aries, again, that same spot I've been talking about, you are in the hot zone for the Venus retrograde. Now, when I was thinking about what happened during my Venus retrograde in 2017, I was like, what was going on with me in 2017 during that Venus retrograde? So Aries actually rules my 7th house of relationships. And at the time, Venus was retrograding in my 7th house of relationships, and I was getting divorced at that time. I wasn't even divorced yet, but I was separated from my ex-husband, and I was finally starting to go out on dates with other people. And wow, it was crazy. After years of being with the same person, I was finally like going out and being independent, Venus and Aries, and like meeting new people. But as Venus retrograde in Pisces back into my 6th house of health, I got the flu, like a really, really bad strain of the flu. And I think I accidentally got the person that I was dating at the time. I think they also got the flu too. But that's what was happening to me. I was dating again for the first time. I was independent. I was having fun. But it was also kind of crazy in a way because I did get really sick and with the flu, and it reminded me like I don't have my partner there to kind of help me and be there for me, and I'm really like suffering. So it was an interesting time. And think about, so I'm just giving you guys that example, um, because I want you to think about what was going on for you in March and April of 2017, and what two houses was Venus retrograding in for you. And perhaps maybe you may see some repetitive themes or get an idea of what may be coming for you. So I just wanted to mention my story in that, but I think it could be a very steamy retrograde. You know, if you take water and fire and put them together, you get steam. So I think the Venus retrograde has the ability to be kind of steamy. Now, I love Venus in Aries, even though Venus is in detriment in Aries. I actually love it, because it really makes me think about the fighting woman. And for those of you that at the beginning of the year, you're like, I'm going to work out, I'm going to da 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 da. And by a month, you're like, oh, I forgot, I'm not working out anymore. The Venus retrograde may be a really good time for you to reset as it relates to working out, sport, getting back into a routine. And that starts on March 1st. So if you find yourself like slipping out of your New Year's resolution, maybe you can take the Venus retrograde to come back to it and get back on the horse again, okay? But when I think about Venus retrograde in Aries, I think about standing up for yourself. Standing up for yourself, but not, hurting others in the process, obviously, but definitely fighting back and standing up for yourself. Now, when a planet is retrograde, it's not behaving sometimes like it normally does. So, very nice, sweet, socially acceptable Venus becomes far more straightforward and less docile in the sign of Aries. But it's about building healthy confidence without stepping on other people. And during that time of the Venus retrograde from March 1st to April 12th, I would probably avoid beauty treatments or plastic surgery during this time if you can. And it could be a great time, like I said, to get back into your workout routine or get back into your fitness routine. And I want to show you guys the Six of Swords. You are here. You know what I'm talking about. I've given this advice already, and I think it's good advice for 2025. But definitely, like if you're into kickboxing and you're like, I got to get my freaking energy up, I got to get moving. Definitely take this Venus retrograde. I love how strong and proud and she's just very I love this imagery, the artwork here for the Venus retrograde. And, strong women standing up for themselves, definitely. And we have what will it be like? Now, it's the Venus and Aries portion is really kick butt, I feel like, in a way, or you can really harness it and take advantage of it. But as Venus slides back into Pisces, it gets more complicated throughout the retrograde, and it could be quite possibly a very complicated retrograde. Here's a picture of the chart at the moment that Venus is going retrograde on March 1st. And as she starts her retrogradation, she is sandwiched in between the moon and Chiron, which tells me that Venus has a lot of lessons to learn here about fighting for herself, and that Venus starts her journey between the moon and Chiron with some emotional healing that she is wanting to do, and she wants to do it on her own. Okay, that's the message that I got from that. I have some emotional healing and I need to do this independently by myself, okay? But as Venus starts to kind of slip back, you can see as she moves backwards, she's going to hit Neptune, the North Node, Mercury, the Sun, and eventually she's going to station direct right next to Saturn. Okay, so that is very complicated energy because not only at the same time as Venus retrograde, Mercury's also retrograde. There's eclipses happening at the same time that Venus is retrograde, and Venus is making a conjunction to a ton of planets to freaking half the sky, really. And this March April energy is some of the most complicated of the entire year, as this is all playing out in the month of March and the first half of April. Um, so it's something to be, aware of, that this is a very complicated time, and that when Venus stations direct, she's going to be stationing direct right next to Saturn. And what that tells me is that Venus's lessons during this retrograde may become, if it gets too out of control, may become quite heavy and karmic. So we need to be careful of slipping in and out of intentional mindsets when it comes to relationships and love. It's like, okay, I'm ready to do this on my own. I'm ready to take the first step. I'm ready to, oh, Symmetry is here. Oh my goodness. Hi, my love. Thank you for joining. All my favorites are here. Literally everyone I love is here. Mwah. And and so, except with, there's are a few that I could think of that aren't here, but I'm so happy that so many of you, like, I love you guys. Thank you for being on my channel with me. And yeah, so with Venus hitting her station direct next to Saturn, it could be like I start out this retrograde on my own, ready to conquer the world and do my own healing and not really let anybody get involved in it. But by the end, I'm feeling kind of tortured, Or if you were just like getting out of a relationship, but then when Venus starts to hit Neptune and the North Node and all these other planets, it's like, oh my God, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting sucked back in to wanting this person back in my life again. We can start off like really strong, but then we can kind of break down as we go. And so I think we need to be a little bit careful of this energy as Venus is retrograde. And there may be pressure to forgive people and like overlook the bad things of the past because you really want to believe in them. And what we're going to have is we're going to have an exalted Venus in Pisces at the 29th degree, anaretic, in a conjunction with Neptune and the North Node. That is like a really, really blown out Venus where we can get high on the possibilities of what could be. And legit, you guys may have people call you up, your best friend or somebody that and or maybe even yourself, and say, oh my God, I met someone, right? When Venus in Pisces hits the North Node and Neptune, it's like, I'm in love. I met somebody and you wouldn't believe it. And my God, they're amazing. And we clicked on a spiritual level. And I feel like this could be my soulmate. And I feel like we could be forever, right? But then as Venus keeps retrograding back to Saturn, it's like we get the reality check when Venus stations direct with Saturn, and it's like, oh my gosh, like this is actually a mess. Or and the with Venus stationing direct next to Saturn, it may be a very low moment where the high of something kind of has worn off and we're starting to really feel the weight of the situation. Mercury is going to be retrograded and debilitated in Pisces at the same time too. And this can be where we're making errors in judgment and we're only hearing what we want to hear and what makes us feel good in the moment. And we're having a lot of confirmation bias and incorrect calculations or misinterpretation of intentions. And then we get that reality check once Venus is stationing direct. So I don't want to diminish the fact that some people may be having some very high level spiritual experiences at this time, and that it could be a very special moment for some people. But we also have to work hard to keep our feet on the ground during this time. And I wanted to highlight, oh, Holly is here. Oh my gosh, Holly's of course you're here, Holly. Of course you are. I said all my favorite people are here. So yeah. And One thing I really want to point out to you guys is the potential for spiritual awakenings next year. Okay. And I want you to mark down a date if you can, or you can come back to it and write it down later. But March 27th, big day. March 27th, Venus is retrograde. It's in a conjunction with Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces. Neptune is at 29. Venus is at 29. The North Node is really, really close, okay? Now, if you're not falling head over heels for somebody that you shouldn't be falling head over heels for, right? And you know that. You know better within yourself. The other side of the equation might be people who are having insane spiritual awakenings next year. And that may come around the end of March when we have this Venus-Neptune North Node thing going on. And it could be a very poignant moment for artists, people who exist in visual mediums, channelers, spiritualists, beautiful mystical moments of seeing God. Oh my God, I've awakened and I freaking saw God. I had the craziest dream and everything opened up to me. And my Kundalini awakening happened and my third eye opened. Like, it could literally be a day where people are having mass spiritual awakenings, okay? Dream work, epic during this time. Vision work, epic, okay? These things are at an all-time high. And we are in all the feels. We feel everything. I feel it in my soul, right? The other side of that, though, is that the chi vampires or the energy vampires may be in full effect at this time as well. And what I mean by that is people who make you feel guilty or bad for having a boundary, okay? Whether that's friends, family, or a lover, an ex-lover, people who say the right thing in the right moment and pull some shit in that moment, and we fall for it because we're gullible and we're vulnerable in a moment, okay? So I don't want to take away from the fun that, wow, we could be having some massive spiritual awakenings going on at the planet, in the planet at that time. And it could be like really fun, you know, in that regard, but be on the lookout for energy vampires or chi vampires who are trying to guilt you to like lower your boundaries, okay? So be on the lookout for that. Love bombing could be at an all-time high. But like I said, it could bring on, like it could be a moment where you listen to a piece of music that just brings you to tears. Artists, I feel like at this time could be having extremely epic moments of insane creativity and like really pulling off something magical and beautiful and creating artwork that is like insanely moving and gorgeous. Like, whoa, that is the most like intense piece of art I've ever seen. And it's just gorgeous and beautiful. And it's bringing me to tears. Like literally there could be this energy. And I think it's some of the most interesting energy of 2025. It really reminded me of a time in my early 20s when I was having a legit Kundalini awakening. And I had to sleep with the lights on for a long time because, I mean, I was having so many visitations at the time. But I fell asleep, halfway asleep on my bed, like probably 9 p.m. at night. And I opened my eyes just a little and I was just barely awake. I was kind of in that liminal space and I opened my eyes and I saw this huge electric butterfly materialize in front of my face, and it's massive and its wings were flapping at me and I could like feel it on my face, and I was like, holy shit. I was like, am I hallucinating? I was too stunned to speak. I was just like, whoa. And I really do feel that people could be having some genuine moments of spiritual awakening, but we just need to make sure that we have our feet on the ground, and that if we see one of our friends kind of like going off the deep end and being like, I met someone I'm in love and it's forever, and it's like, okay, we just want to make sure feet are on the ground, everything's okay, right? It's not to say that people couldn't be connecting with their soulmates on a really deep level at that time. They totally could. We just need to, like I said, try to keep some of our feet on the ground. And yeah, it was amazing, Anahara. Like, it was so crazy amazing. And I feel like there are people across the world that could be having experiences like that with this Venus Neptune at 29 Pisces. Like, it could be really rich and really deep for a lot of people. And so, as we talk about the Venus retrograde next year, positive versus negatives. So a positive could be like a steamy romance that really takes off, or it could be about going back to somebody out of guilt. You know, like I spoke about with the chi vampires guilting you, like definitely stay away from that energy. With the Venus retrograde, we could have the seduction of the new versus losing myself in another, right? Like, oh my God, I'm being seduced and this feels amazing. And wow, this is like so epic. But I'm losing myself in the other person. And I'm, like I don't know who I am anymore because I'm merging with this other person. And we went into this, you know, conglomerate energy together, and now we're like a mass floating around together. Like, anyway, you guys, I'm being silly, but you guys know what I mean, how it is to like lose yourself in another person. We want to be careful of that. And I do love the energy of standing out and bold confidence during this Venus retrograde. We need to not water ourselves down to please other people. There may be a longing for a deep soul connection, though, during this Venus retrograde. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But people may really be waking up and saying, I'm so longing for like a really deep, soulful, spiritual connection with another human being. That is, it's okay to long for that and to want that and to reach for that. But we want to be careful that we're not begging someone to leave during that time. And I don't know if that's ever happened to you guys, if you've been on the receiving end of that, or if you've had other people beg you not to leave them, or if you've begged someone else, and it's pretty tough energy when we feel like we're on our knees and we're like crying and sobbing, and it's like, please don't leave. There may be some of that going on too during the retrograde. But if you are having that, please, reach out for support. And if you are feeling that level of intensity, please do. And we definitely kind of want to try to stay away from begging someone not to leave, or having someone guilt us and beg us not to leave and then kind of going back. So those are some energies, with the Venus retrograde next year that we really want to think about and try to understand. And now I would like to move into one of my like favorite sections. That Venus retrograde section, I have to say, is one of my favorite sections of the presentation. But I also love this section in talking about the nodal shift. So in January of the upcoming year, the nodes have been in Aries and Libra since, I think it was like March of 2023, or maybe it was June of 2023, I forgot. But it was sometime there in 2023 that we've been having Aries and Libra eclipses, okay? And we are going to have our last eclipse in Aries in 2025 on March 29th, the day before Neptune goes into Aries, okay? So that is interesting. But the nodes are actually going out of Aries and Libra and moving into Pisces and Virgo. Now, the nodes move backwards, so that's why they're going back into Pisces and Virgo. And the shift is going to happen in January, like next month, actually. And right away in March, we're going to have our first eclipse in Virgo. We already had a teaser eclipse. In September, we had a Pisces lunar eclipse that was in a conjunction with Neptune on September 18th of this year. So we had one teaser already in Pisces, but next year, after that last solar eclipse in Aries in the end of March, we are fully moving into Pisces Virgo eclipse territory. Now, for those of you that can kind of remember what was happening in your life in 2006 and 2007, we're having a repeat of eclipses that would have been happening to you in 2006 and 2007. So think about that time in your life and what was going on. Also pay attention to what houses the eclipses are happening in for you. For those of you that have felt like the Aries and Libra eclipses have been very rough, I have felt that they have been extremely rough. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of relief with the nodes moving into Pisces and Virgo. Now, for those of you who are Pisces and Virgo, or you have your moon there, your sun there, or your ascendant there, you are going to be having eclipses on either your sun, your moon, or your ascendant, and that is intense energy. So for my Pisces and Virgo people out there, hang tight, my loves. We're about ready to go into Pisces Virgo time for eclipses. And I have the dates that the eclipses are going to happen. They are in March and September of this upcoming year. So that's why I'm saying March is going to be a very messy month. We have a Venus retrograde, a Mercury retrograde. Neptune is going into Aries. We have eclipses. It is going to be a very messy month. September is also potentially very messy because of these eclipses as well, and a bunch of retrogrades and stationings and things like that are moving back into old signs that are happening in September. Now, especially the March 14th eclipse. The March 14th eclipse has a potential to be very messy because it's with Saturn and Neptune and during the Venus retrograde and one day before Mercury stations retrograde. So that September 14th one may be particularly messy. But I do want you guys to reflect on what was going on in 2006 and 2007 and think about what was happening then, because the eclipses are coming back to that area. Now, I have this beautiful picture here of Virgo at the top and Pisces at the bottom. Actually, the North Node will be in Pisces. I should have switched that around. We should have had the ocean on top and then the ground on the bottom, because that's what we're going to have next year. But some things we may see with the nodes shifting into Virgo and Pisces is especially with the South Node in Virgo, is not valuing details or science, disorientation, self-doubt, oversensitivity, perfectionism, withdrawing, vagueness, freeing the mind through meditation, North Node in Pisces, trusting in positive outcomes, self-confidence through experience, taking a risk in spite of a fear. Okay, and this is the hard part, losing a grip on reality, forgetting things, scaring ourselves, people or aspects of who we are going missing. Okay, I feel like there could be a lot of people going missing during these eclipses for some reason. I don't know, like on a milk carton going missing. And there may be this thing of like, I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality, or I'm forgetting things a lot, or I forgot the details of this particular thing with the South Node in Virgo. With the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo, we need to be really careful with stress on helpers. And when I say helpers, I mean people who do counseling, people who work in the medical field, people who work in nursing homes, people who take care of the elderly and children, on teachers, on counselors. We need to really, during this time of the nodes shifting into Pisces and Virgo, of being careful of putting too much stress on helpers and on services as well, like a lot of stress on services and possibly a lot of stress on hospitals. And also managing stress in our day-to-day lives are things that we really need to look at with the nodes moving. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we had a teaser of a eclipse in Pisces on September 18th, 2024 of this year. We had the very first little teaser happen. And right after that eclipse was on Neptune. A few days after that eclipse, Hurricane Helene hit. And as a result of Hurricane Helene, there was like a lot of IV IV bag shortages where hospitals, the company that makes IV bags was in the eye of like the hurricane and got destroyed, or their production facility got messed up, and it caused a massive IV bag shortage in the US, which I feel like we're still dealing with, or we haven't gotten out of it yet. And I think that is a big hint of something to come with the eclipses in Pisces and Virgo. And my whole point about stress on helpers and hospitals, or even like having a shortage of materials for hospitals, is something that could come up. And with the eclipse on Neptune, we saw the destruction of water. Again, Neptune is a major theme in 2025. We could see more of that. It's very interesting because on a personal level, on September 18th, on the night of that eclipse in Pisces, my neighbor's water heater broke that night, and their entire place flooded in the middle of the night. And the next morning I woke up and I saw all this water getting pumped out of my neighbor's apartment. The other thing is that that same night, while my neighbor's apartment was getting completely flooded, I woke up in the middle of the night from a massive nightmare, and I really felt a spiritual presence in the room, and I screamed literally at the top of my lungs. I woke up and my vocal cords were hoarse because of the way I had screamed. And when I woke up in the morning, I found a dead fly on my tarot table, the table that I do my tarot readings on, underneath a deck of cards. And I thought, is someone doing like magical work against me? Like, what is going on, you guys? Like, I was flipped out about it. The eclipses for me were happening in my 6th and 12th house, which, 12th house is the house of secret and hidden enemies. So it kind of freaked me out for a minute. But when we've got eclipses happening in Pisces, it can get kind of freaky like that. And we can find that, hospitals and helpers and services and daily stresses are building up, and we can start freaking ourselves out and forgetting things and losing things. And so we are going to want to be a little bit careful with that energy with the Pisces, Rahu in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo. And I did a little study on it because I was like, okay, what was going on during when the North Node was in Pisces and the South Node was in Virgo? What was going on during 2006 and 2007? Now, when you think of the North Node in Pisces, keep in mind that the North Node is not really comfortable in Pisces, because the North Node is about like materialism and acquiring things, and Pisces is more of like a charitable sign, or known for being more charitable. So the North Node actually does much better in Virgo, and the South Node would be much better in Pisces. But we have a flipping of that energy. And in 2006, the 2006 in the United States was a huge year for atheism. And what's interesting is that Uranus was in Pisces at the time in 2006, and the eclipses were happening with the Uranus in Pisces. And the concept of having like a devout atheist is a very Uranian concept in the first place. But in 2006, we saw writers like Richard Dawkins publishing his book, The God Delusion. We saw Sam Harris writing Letter to a Christian Nation. These books like shot to the top, and we saw this huge flip for atheism. And one of the main things was no heaven, no hell, just science. And is a very interesting energy. But at the time, the nodes were squaring Pluto in Sagittarius and in a conjunction with Pisces. And so it was very much like a time of spiritually questioning things. But in 2025, when we have these eclipses, the North Node is actually going to be with Saturn and Neptune. So are we going to see a return of religious piety, or a theme of sacrifice and strife themes as it relates to religion? Are people going to be looking for a savior, but there is none, right? And that's a lyric from a song, right? I'm looking for a savior, but there is none. And interesting energy, I think. And there may be a lot of people convinced that the second coming is coming, escapism, stuff like that. Also, with the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo, in 2007, there was a notable event related to H5N1, which is the bird flu virus. And at that time, it mutated and it became this highly pathogenic, fastly mutating, genetically different strain of flu. And it was quick and it was nasty and it just spread very rapidly. And it started spreading into Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh and places that it hadn't really gone before. The energy of the North Node in Pisces, to me, I don't necessarily. There are things about it I don't like, and the one in the South Node in Virgo, and I hope we're not going to have a really bad flu season or like, a super spreader or some major event around that. I hope not. But when you look back at what was happening in 2007, when we were having those eclipses, there was like a really nasty, highly pathogenic, fast mutating H5N1 bird flu that was going around. And we've already started to hear musings about this in the media, that there is like bird flu is on the rise and there's, things going on. So I think that is an energy that we do need to watch out for in 2025. And also, themes of, and not just 2025, but 2026, and themes of religion, either piety and sacrifice, or a return to religion, or a rejection of religion, like what was happening in 2006. It's probably more of a piety thing with Saturn and Neptune there. And I am reminded of the wonderful Tori Amos, who has created a lot of religious and spiritual themed art, which we may see with Neptune, or not with Neptune, with the North Node in Pisces. And I'm reminded of her song Crucify and the lyrics to that song. And I feel like it's very Saturn, Neptune, North Node in Pisces. And some of those lyrics are, I've been looking for a savior in these dirty streets. I've been looking for a savior beneath these dirty sheets. I've been raising up my hands to drive another nail in. Just what God needs, one more victim. Why do we crucify ourselves every day? I crucify myself and nothing I do is good enough for you. My heart is sick of being in chains. And wow, what powerful lyrics and art. And this is what I was talking about earlier with, art and music and the power of it, and how I feel like it's really ramping up in 2025. And those lyrics to me are very like North Node in Pisces, and we may see some of that kind of art coming to the surface as well. And now this is probably one of my favorite slides that I did, the next one. And this is my South Node in Virgo slide, and I'm like, oh my God, could the South Node in Virgo be any more obvious, right? And what we see, this is the image that you see on the screen, is parasite eating worms entering RFK Jr.'s brain. Okay, and this is the person that Trump has nominated in the United States to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. And I shouldn't laugh, but what else are you going to do, right, when you're going down in flames? But they nominated this guy, RFK Jr., to be Health and Human Services Secretary. And this guy is all about drinking raw milk, or he's really into raw milk. And the problem is like there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff that's in raw milk that you probably just shouldn't be drinking, but I guess he's into it. And then he's also like a major vaccine skeptic, and he's said before that there's no vaccine that's safe and effective. Even though he's saying he's not going to take vaccines away, he has a very anti vaccine, even for like polio or whooping cough, or, saying things that vaccines are, all bad. He has a lot of anti-science conspiracy theories. And what's funny, what's to remember about the South Node is that South Node is the headless part of the snake, right? So Rahu is the head of the snake and is the head only, and Ketu is the body of the snake and has no head attached to it. So all you have is like a snake that's like swirling around like that with no head. And it can be like the not thinking or the not common sense like part of things. And Virgo is a sign that like thrives on common sense or thrives on science and data. And the South Node moving into Virgo, with this guy being nominated to this position, scientists are already like pre-freaking out. And they're saying that vaccine rates could potentially plummet, and then measles and whooping cough outbreaks could happen, and children could suffer brain damage. I mean, scientists are really like freaking out about potentially like this guy leading the FDA or like firing all these people. And especially during a time where, according to the transits earlier that I mentioned, like dangerous flus could be on the rise and avian flu could be on the rise again. This is all very South Node and Virgo stuff. He distrusts pharmaceuticals. He encourages like psychedelic medicines, which might be kind of cool, but sometimes you just need like a regular pharmaceutical to get you through too. Anyway, he's talked about wellness farms and putting people who are like on antidepressants or whatever into wellness farms until they get better. Like, this is all very South Node and Virgo, and it had me in a total uproar, like thinking about the South Node and Virgo and the aspect of the headless snake and like doing whatever and like not thinking and not having common sense. And the sign of Virgo is like wild. It's very wild energy. And RFK Jr. has said before that heroin actually made him smarter, and that he started doing well in school when he started taking heroin, which is so South Node and Virgo. I'm like, oh my God. And then there's all these memes saying the worm, because RFK Jr. said that there was a parasite in his head that ate part of his brain, South Node and Virgo, and that the worm in his brain is telling him to bring back heavily leaded paint. It made his generation smart. These are some memes that came out from it. And then there's another thing that says replace Doritos with dehydrated goat hooves. And then another meme that came out about him that said ban deodorant because natural pheromones promote community bonding. I was like, this stuff is way South Node and Virgo. And I think we're going to have a major lesson next year in the South Node and Virgo. Like that energy is coming out swinging already. And yeah, we definitely need to watch that part. Now, I wanted to give you guys a positive example too of like the North Node in Pisces. I mean, the North Node can be very ravenous and materialistic. And I talked about, fake healers or people making money off of people's suffering and all of that. But I also feel like there's some very positive examples of the North Node in Pisces. And I was drawn to a post on TikTok of a woman who around Thanksgiving time, she's called the Dollar Tree Meal Lady, and she teaches people how to, like, if you only have $20 to spend on Thanksgiving, if you only have $20 to spend, you can go to the Dollar Tree and she'll show you all the ingredients and show you how to make it to have a Thanksgiving, even if you don't have like the money to do it, to like spend hundreds of dollars, you can still have a good meal. And I thought, wow, that is very North Node in Pisces, is, compassionate, loving, teaching others how to cook for themselves on a budget. And there was a comment under her post that said, now that is an influencer, because she has like 1 million followers or whatever online, but she teaches people how to make low cost meals that can fill you up and feed your family and everything. And I thought, okay, that's a very good example of the North Node in Pisces in a very positive way. And maybe we will be noting more about that in the future, hopefully. I also really loved this poster here for the North Node and the South Node, North Node in Pisces and South Node in Virgo. And it's this don't panic, organize poster. It talks about when we're all like fishes that are like swimming by ourselves, it's easier for the man to come and like attack us and gulp us up. But when we organize together and become one big conglomerate energy, North Node in Pisces, South Node in Virgo, organizing, coming together around a purpose, and North Node in Virgo, right? We come together as this big conglomerate. We can actually turn around and eat the person that was trying to, or put them in their place at least, or eat the person that was trying to individually kind of like pick us off. And so to me, because there's posters and it's a fish and it's talking about organizing, I thought, what a brilliant poster for the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo. And it really does show a good lesson for all of us to remember that we're stronger when we're together as a group or a conglomerate than we are individually when we can just be kind of picked off by the bigger fish. And so I think that that is really like a positive note to leave for the North Node. Now, I'm going to talk quickly about the transit of Jupiter into Cancer. I already kind of mentioned it earlier. I'm ending us on a good note, everybody, like on a more, I know we've talked a lot about serious things, but Jupiter is entering Cancer on June 9th. And we're going to see Jupiter, like for half of the year, Jupiter's in Gemini for the first half of the year, and then Jupiter's moving into Cancer. And really think about what house Jupiter is going to be in for you. For me, it's going to be in my 10th house. So I really hope that my channel grows and my work grows and what I'm doing in the world is really growing for me next year. That would be amazing. And maybe you have a wish for next year too, and your fairy godmother, Jupiter in Cancer, can come and help you. But where is Cancer in your particular chart? Because Jupiter is going to be coming there and blessing you. And if you have planets in Cancer, yay, good. And because we have Saturn and Neptune in Aries, there's going to be some hardship there. We know that right when Jupiter goes into Cancer, it is getting challenged by Saturn and Neptune. And I talked about that earlier. But Jupiter is the faster moving planet, and it actually moves on quite quickly. And later on in the year, we start getting some really beautiful water trines. Also, if you have any planets in Taurus or Virgo, you're going to be having that Jupiter in Cancer is going to be sextiling your planets in Taurus and Virgo and trining any water planets you have in your chart. And later in the year, when Saturn and Neptune both retrograde back into Pisces, Jupiter in Cancer is going to be trining the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And there may be a moment of healing there or applying of a Band-Aid from earlier in the year that felt very broken and hard. And so I do think Jupiter in Cancer, there's some really good things about it. The next half of the year, right when it goes into Cancer, it gets challenged, but later on in the year, things do go better. And I was thinking about my own chart because Jupiter's in Gemini right now, and Gemini is my 9th house in my chart. And this year, I moved to a city and I have access to one of the biggest esoteric libraries in the entire nation, which is at the Edgar Cayce Center. And I actually became friends with the librarian, the head librarian that works there. And she's given me some amazing books and rare books and things like that. And I have access to this beautiful esoteric library, and you should see all the amazing astrology books in the library too. And it's just like when I walked into that library, I was like, I'm in Jupiter Gemini heaven. Wow, I'm at this beautiful library and got access to all these books and these astrology books and these tarot books, and oh my gosh, how amazing. And And that was Jupiter in Gemini for me. So think about, Jupiter in Cancer could be equally amazing and could do equally amazing things for you in your chart. So look forward to that. Think about where can, Jupiter in or where can Jupiter in Cancer really show some benefit for me in my life. And that will be amazing, hopefully, for you in 2025. And I love this photo for the picture of Jupiter in Cancer, and I'm calling it that full feeling. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. It doesn't mean that everything about Jupiter in Cancer is going to be amazing, right? But I'm winding down now. I'm almost done with my presentation, so we could start focusing on some of the good things. And, Jupiter in Cancer is going to be creating abundance with planets in your chart in Cancer. Jupiter is a place of hope and expansion. And I think after Jupiter moves out of the square with Saturn and Neptune, when we start getting into August and later months of the year, that Jupiter is going to really take off and do well. And for those of you that like electional astrology, or you're trying to decide, when's a good time to do something, I feel like we're going to have some really good electional charts next year. Because monthly Jupiter is going to be making contact with the moon in Cancer. And as long as it's like later degrees and past the Saturn Neptune stuff, or Saturn and Neptune have moved back into Pisces and now it's trining Jupiter in Cancer, like I do feel like there could be some really amazing electional charts later on in 2025, like post August of 2025. For those of you that are trying to make elections or help something grow, or help you achieve something in a particular area, wow, I feel like there could be some real positive elections there. And Jupiter in Cancer is asking us to create sanctuaries for self-healing, to slow down, to appreciate our emotional connection, like I showed you with the Ten of Cups earlier. It could have to do with parent-child bonding, inner child healing, sensitive moments of connection, big pregnancies, fertile energies, big meals, cooking, food, family, and togetherness, or a longing for this energy or a longing for those nostalgic moments. It is an invitation to make gentle memories with the people that you love, and it may be an awesome time for abundance magic after Jupiter gets out of the Saturn-Neptune square and Saturn and Neptune have moved back into Pisces. So if you have like water planets in your chart, if you've got planets in Scorpio or Pisces, with Jupiter moving into Cancer, that is actually a really nice energy, because Jupiter in Cancer is going to be trining your water planets. So that feels very healing for the water sign people. That may feel very abundant and nice for you. And now I wouldn't be very much of an astrologer if I didn't present to you guys when Mercury is going to be retrograde next year. So kind of closing the loop here with the dates that Mercury is retrograde. And I've got this fire water picture going on here with the yin and yang and the fire and the water, because it is such a fire water year, as I've kind of explained already. And even the Mercury retrogrades are in the fire element this year, with transition into the water element. So every year, it's like every other year, Mercury transitions to either retrograding in fire signs or water signs or earth signs, and it'll retrograde in those particular signs for a whole year. And then the year after that, it starts to kind of transition into the next triplicity that it's going to be retrograding in. So in this case, we have a retrograde in fire signs with a transition back to water element. So Mercury is retrograde on March 15th. And it is going over that Gandanta point I talked about earlier. It's retrograding from Aries back into Pisces. So it starts its retrograde in fire. It moves back into water. And that is an interesting retrograde, because it is one day. Mercury goes retrograde one day after the lunar eclipse in Virgo and during the Venus retrograde. The Mercury will be retrograde back into Pisces, and it's in fall in Pisces and will be in a conjunction with Neptune. So that is going to be an intense retrograde. The March retrograde, yeah, Mercury retrograde, intense. The July 18th retrograde is a little less complicated because it's solely in Leo. It's only a retrograde. It doesn't actually even go back into Cancer. It retrogrades from Leo back 15 Leo back to 4 Leo. Now, in early July, Saturn and Neptune are going retrograde for the first time. So I'm not saying that July is going to be like boring or anything. July is going to be a very, heavy month with a lot of things happening. Like there's going to be a lot happening in the collective and in the news and everything. It's going to be interesting, but the retrograde itself is not as complicated as the March retrograde. And really the only major aspect that is happening is near the end of the retrograde, Mercury will oppose Pluto near the end of the retrograde. It's just the July retrograde, I feel, isn't quite as complicated as the March one. The November 9th retrograde, which starts in Sagittarius and goes back into Scorpio next year, that retrograde is also going back over the Gandanta point, and Mercury will retrograde right next to Mars in Sagittarius next year, hot off of its Uranus opposition. This is going to be a spicy retrograde. I think the March retrograde and the November retrograde are both going to be very spicy indeed. And the retrograde that we just had right now in November in Sagittarius, it may kind of feel like the retrograde we had now, like news stories constant and big stories and breaking news and just kind of a wild retrograde. I think the March retrograde and the November retrograde are actually positioned to be like quite a big deal as maybe compared to the July one. Not just like I said, July is going to be a big deal, though. Perhaps not 100% because of the retrograde, though. I don't know. We'll see. July is messy still. Okay. So now we are finally to the end, everybody. We are finally coming to a close. And in summary, I would say March, April, June, July, September, and November of next year all look really messy, but that's okay. It's going to be a steamy, passionate year of firsts and new beginnings next year. All the outer planets are changing signs. Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus have all changed signs and are bouncing around all year. And even Saturn is changing as well too. And I just want to close with saying, and one of my favorite astrologers that I love to watch has been calling it the halftime show. So I'll steal a page from his playbook and just end the presentation with now we're in the middle of the 2020s and we're at 2025, and it's a good time to mention that the halftime show is starting in 2025. So with that, I am going to go ahead and leave it there, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the webcast. Let me know how you felt about it, what thoughts or questions you have, and we will see you in 2025, my friends. Good night and take care.